Chapter 3096. Under the wide black robe was an ugly face covered in scars. Granny Beast Tamer opened her mouth with missing front teeth and revealed a sinister smile. She looked even more ferocious and terrifying. Ji Tianqing couldn't help but frown and sneer. Since you're so stubborn, don't blame me for being ruthless. I'll chop them into minced meat later and barbecue them. I'll let you have a good taste. Hee hee. Granny Beast Tamer sneered even more sinisterly. That's a good idea. I'll cook you like this later. After saying that, she turned around with her walking stick and retreated behind Long Fun. Long Fun stared at Ji Tianqing and sneered. Since we've already greeted each other, let's not waste any more time. Let your scoundrel friends come out and die together. Don't try to resist. It's useless. I've already investigated your background. Since I dared to ambush you here, I'm fully confident that I can catch all of you in one fell swoop. Hee hee, so confident? Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a mocking sneer as killing intent burst out from his body. It just so happens that I've comprehended a few new divine powers. I'll use you as a test. As soon as he finished speaking, Ji Tianqing used his divine powers and instantly turned into a golden armored god of war that was 10,000 feet tall. He didn't hide his strength. He used the celestial dragon tyrant body right away and went all out. A dazzling golden light illuminated a radius of thousands of miles. The supreme divine power that suppressed heaven and earth sealed off an area of 10,000 miles. He held the divine seal with both hands and erupted with endless divine power as he pointed at the sky. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, more than 10,000 golden light spots appeared in the distant sky. Each golden light was like a meteor falling, pouring down toward this part of the world. Before the golden light arrived, a terrifying sword intent that could suppress everything enveloped a radius of 10,000 miles. Without a doubt, this was the heaven-destroying sword formation. The golden light that filled the sky descended rapidly. Everyone could clearly see that it was more than 10,000 incomparably huge divine golden swords. Long Fun and Granny Beast Tamer couldn't help but frown. The 11 heavenly sect experts also stopped sneering and their expressions became solemn. Everyone could feel the immense pressure, and their confidence quickly dissipated. Granny Beast Tamer didn't hesitate any longer. She hurriedly wielded her snake-headed walking stick and performed a strange secret magic. 200 miles away, the more than 300 divine beasts suddenly became bloodthirsty and berserk. Their eyes were bloodshot and emitted flames. Roar! 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 All the mythological beasts roared furiously and recklessly rushed towards Ji Tianqing. Clearly, Granny Beast Tamer had given the order to the divine beasts. They had locked onto Ji Tianqing and were determined to tear him to pieces at all costs. Swish! Swish! In the blink of an eye, more than 26 winged divine birds as large as palaces rushed to Ji Tianqing as fast as they could. They all stretched out their razor-sharp claws and clawed at Ji Tianqing. It then used its sharp, spear-like beak to viciously stab Ji Tianqing's vital points. The sharp claws and beaks of these second-level divine monarch realm 6-winged divine birds were comparable to monarch-level divine artifacts. Their combat power was very strong. Soon, Ji Tianqing's figure was drowned and was about to be torn apart by the divine birds. Instead, he unhurriedly waved his palms and unleashed dozens of 5-colored sword lights. Swish! 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 Kaboom! Rumble! Those dozens of 5-colored sword lights not only contained a few types of divine power, but they also contained the violent power of divine thunder. When they pierced or slashed those divine birds, there was a deafening explosion, and feathers and flesh flew all over the sky. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 divine birds were blasted into pieces, and blood rained all over the sky. They were the fastest to charge, but they were also the first to die. But this horrifying scene couldn't intimidate those bloodthirsty divine beasts. Many mountain-sized demon bulls, silver wind wolves, raging flame leopards, and flying tigers were still charging over fearlessly. There were even a few venomous pythons that looked like giant dragons that sprayed poisonous fog that covered the sky, shrouding the divine warship and Ji Tianqing. Fortunately, the Heaven Punishment Sword Array was finally formed. Swish, 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 swish. More than 10,000 divine giant swords sealed off an area of 10,000 miles, like a huge golden canopy that suppressed everything. The dazzling sword light flew back and forth in the sky, releasing a violent sword intent. Only muffled bangs could be heard, and they exploded in the sky one after another. Immediately, dozens of divine beasts with huge bodies were cut into pieces by the divine giant swords that filled the sky, and blood rained all over the sky. Moreover, the Heaven Punishment Sword Array released an invisible suppressive force that slowed down the charging speed of many divine beasts by more than half. Their speed suddenly slowed down, and their momentum also weakened a little. But they were already bloodthirsty and crazy, and they didn't know what fear was. Even if divine beasts were killed by the sword lights every second, and turned into pieces and blood raining all over the sky, they weren't affected at all and continued to charge at Ji Tianqing and the others without any regard for their own safety. Swish. At this time, Lin Shui put away the divine ship, and Shi, Zhen Hong, and the others all appeared in the night sky. Everyone fought together with Ji Tianqing, forming a defensive circle around each other, and together, they resisted the attacks of many divine beasts. Evil beasts die! Damned beasts go to hell! Shui Huan, Gold Left Emissary, and Blood Dragon Right Emissary all roared with murderous intent. They waved their sabers and Kenshin weapons, releasing super-power light shadows all over the sky. Zhen Hong unleashed all of his strength, and directly entered a berserk state, turning into a dragon-shaped war goddess that was thousands of feet tall. Her whole body burned with bloody flames, exuding a dragon aura that could shake heaven and earth, and she fiercely attacked the group of divine beasts. The divine beasts had an innate respect and fear for the dragon and phoenix tribes. This originated from the nobility of the bloodline and the suppression of the soul level. This was the nature of the beasts, and it was almost uncontrollable by reason. What's more than 300 divine beasts were all bloodthirsty and berserk, and they had no sense of reason. When the invisible dragon aura released by Zhen Hong engulfed those divine beasts, their boiling blood and killing intent seemed to have been splashed with a basin of cold water, and more than half of them instantly cooled down. Even the momentum of his charge was slowed down by a lot. Tyrant Dragon Killing Fist. Zhen Hong roared, clenched his sharp dragon claws into fists, and instantly blasted out dozens of blood-colored fist shadows. With a series of loud bangs, more than 20 divine beasts exploded on the spot, and blood splattered all over the sky. Although Ji Tianqing, Zhen Hong, and the others were very weak in terms of numbers, their auras were even more powerful and berserk than the more than 300 divine beasts. In addition, the divine might of the heaven-destroying sword formation firmly suppressed the many divine beasts. For a moment, Ji Tianqing and the others were not in danger of losing their lives. After fighting for a while, more than 100 divine beasts were killed instantly. Seeing this scene, Granny Beast Tamer's heart ached so much that it dripped blood. She was so angry that her face was distorted. Long Fen also frowned. With a gloomy expression, he waved his hand and ordered, "Everyone, listen up. Go all out and kill Tianqing and his accomplices." Chapter 3097. The dozen or so experts of the He Tian sect had long been unable to suppress their violent killing intent. They blocked the attacks of the sword lights while waiting for Long Fen's order. When Long Fen gave the order, everyone unleashed their most ferocious aura and let out a murderous roar. Everyone waved their divine weapons and charged at Ji Tianqing and the others. Dragon-slaying saber flash. Thousand Saint domineering saber. Thousand Crack Emperor extreme blade. 9 Heaven Imperial Dragon Star slashing sword. 8 Extremes destruction. All the Ser gods unleashed their strongest attacks with all their might, releasing divine skill light shadows that blotted out the sky. The world within a few hundred miles was instantly enveloped by endless divine light and became chaotic. Ji Tianxing and the others were attacked from the front and back, and were in an extremely dangerous situation. Lin Shui, Shui Huan, Zhen Hong, and the others all had extremely solemn expressions. Just the group of ferocious divine beasts alone was difficult for them to deal with. Moreover, the experts of the He Tian sect were even more terrifying than the divine beasts. If a miracle didn't happen, they would definitely lose this battle. Everyone would die here, torn to pieces by the people of the He Tian sect, and become food for the divine beast. Dragon flames burning the sky. Long Fen rushed to the front. He opened his arms and waved his palms, releasing golden dragon flames that covered the sky and earth. The incomparably violent divine power, with an aura that could destroy everything, fiercely suppressed Ji Tianxing and the others. Among all the people present, he was the strongest. The power of this absolute skill was definitely terrifying beyond compare. The dragon flames that covered the sky like a torrential flood were enough to burn everyone to ashes. Before the dragon flames arrived, Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, and the others already felt a great pressure, and a strong sense of fear and dread arose in their hearts. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing stepped forward bravely. Swoosh! His figure flashed and faced Long Fen. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed out with all his might. Rising dragon slash. He slashed out with his sword, but hundreds of sacred golden sword lights formed a wall of light that was 100 miles wide. Swoosh! The holy light wall was like a giant axe, instantly severing the sky. Between Ji Tianxing and Long Fen, 100-mile ravine was slashed open in the sky, like a pitch-black abyss. The dragon flames that blotted out the sky all rushed into the black abyss, and were swallowed by the void. Even Long Fen and the experts of the He Tian sect were blocked by the sacred light wall, unable to get close to Ji Tianxing and the others. This scene was as if space had been severed, and the two sides were in different time and space. It was truly strange and mystical. Xuelin, Zhen Hong, and the others breathed a sigh of relief. They looked surprised and excited. As for Long Fen, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others, their expressions changed drastically as they revealed expressions of disbelief. How is this possible? He actually severed space? Damn it! My connection with my children has been severed. What kind of divine ability is that? It can actually cut open the sky? It's too scary. Other than the legendary Divine King, who else would have such terrifying divine might? Long Fen and the dozen or so Ser gods were stunned. Granny Beast Tamer's mental connection with more than 200 divine beasts was also forcefully severed. No matter how she cast spells, she could not send out orders or control those divine beasts. As a result, those divine beasts had lost control and restraint. They no longer obeyed orders and rules, and acted according to their violent nature. They roared angrily and charged forward without any order, crazily venting their killing fire. Bang bang bang! Swoosh swoosh swoosh! The formation of the divine beasts was messed up, and they began to rampage, chasing after Ji Tianxing and the others and pestering them. The battlefield became chaotic. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Xuelin, Zhen Hong, and the others started a massacre, killing dozens of divine beasts in the chaos. Ji Tianxing also controlled the heaven-destroying sword formation, using thousands of giant swords to form a storm, engulfing the 200 divine beasts. The dazzling golden hurricane swept across the battlefield. Wherever it went, the divine beasts were swept up and immediately crushed into pieces, turning into dust and a rain of blood. In just 10 breaths, more than 100 divine beasts were killed. The remaining 120 divine beasts were also in chaos and mania, charging and killing chaotically. The pressure on Xuelin, Zhen Hong, and the others was greatly reduced, and they all heaved a sigh of relief. Ji Tianxing opened the divine tower again and summoned Yun Yao and Ji Ku. Swoosh! Swoosh! With a flash of silver moonlight, Yun Yao, who was wearing a white dress and looking incomparably holy, appeared. With a flash of crimson fire, Ji Ku, who was wearing a fiery red dress and holding the origin stone divine spear, also appeared beside Ji Tianxing. These two peerless beauties had already broken through to the Ser-God realm and consolidated their foundation of the divine path. Now, they were finally qualified to fight side by side with Ji Tianxing. It was their first time fighting, and they were facing such a dangerous situation. However, they were fearless. They were very confident and their fighting spirit was high. 7 stars accompanying the moon. Yun Yao shouted softly. She held the origin stone divine sword in her hand and waved it towards the group of divine beasts not far away. Suddenly, a crescent moon appeared in the sky and 7 shooting stars fell from the sky. Boom, boom, boom. The light of the stars and moon fell on the group of divine beasts, creating a deafening sound and splashing bright moonlight all over the sky. Under such a beautiful scene, there was a terrifying killing power. More than a dozen mountain-sized divine beasts were all smashed and blood rained down from the sky. 7 flames of the burning god. Ji Ku turned into a shocking fire and waved the origin stone divine spear, splashing 7 colored divine flames into the group of divine beasts. Swoosh! 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 The 7 colored divine flames covered the group of divine beasts. After the flames flashed, more than 30 divine beasts disappeared, leaving only black ashes floating in the sky. Although everyone could see that Yun Yao and Ji Ku were first-level Ser-God realm, their powerful combat strength was not inferior to Zhen Hong, Shui Huan, Left Emissary Jin, and the others. Moreover, their peerless beauty was as dazzling as the sun and moon in the 9 heavens. At this moment, everyone was stunned, and their eyes were focused on the 2 of them. Shui Huan, Left Emissary Jin, and Blood Dragon Right Emissary all had stunned expressions and couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh my God! There are such beautiful women in this world? This is unbelievable! Their beauty is soul-stirring. Even when they kill a group of divine beasts, they don't show the slightest bit of anger. What a stunning beauty! What kind of perfect man is worthy of them?" The 3 men didn't think much of it. They were just stunned. However, Lin Shui and Zhen Hong's mood was a little strange. Zhen Hong looked at Yun Yao and Ji Ku in a daze, and a sense of inferiority flashed in his heart. He murmured silently, "Such perfect beauties are enough to make any woman stunned and envious. They should be the 2 wives that the young master mentioned before, right? No wonder young Mistress Wushuang is so beautiful and cute. Probably only peerless beauties like them can give birth to a fairy like Wushuang." At this moment, Zhen Hong suddenly felt that young Master Tianxing and these 2 beauties were a match made in heaven, a perfect match. And it was enough for her to stay by the young master's side and be a dutiful maid. Mobile version update website Chapter 3098. Just like Zhen Hong, Lin Shui had mixed feelings. However, her state of mind and thoughts were somewhat different. Lin Shui looked at Yun Yao and Ji Ku's figures with a trace of envy in her eyes. She muttered to herself, "Even women are stunned by them, but they won't be jealous. Previously, I thought that the kid was pretending to be a noble and virtuous man. Now that I think about it, it's no wonder that he's so arrogant and indifferent to all kinds of beauties. With 2 such peerless beauties as his wives, he has no regrets or pursuits in life, right?" Soon, everyone came back to their senses. Although Yun Yao and Ji Ku's combat strength was outstanding, the 2 of them were weak. How could they fight against hundreds of divine beasts? Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, and the others couldn't let the 2 of them fight alone. Everyone rushed into the battlefield and fought side by side with Yun Yao and Ji Ku, joining forces to fight against the violent divine beasts. The situation was temporarily stable. Ji Tianxing's figure flashed and strangely passed through the sacred light wall, arriving on the other side of the spatial rift. The dozen or so divine lords of the Hetion sect wanted to go around the light wall that was thousands of miles wide and attack Ji Tianqing and the others. Long Fun and Granny Beast Tamer were still attacking with all their might, crazily bombarding the sacred light wall. However, the golden light barrier was still intact after taking dozens of attacks from the divine abilities. It did not budge at all. At this moment, Ji Tianqing took the initiative to rush over. Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others immediately found their target and surrounded him with sinister smiles. Little bastard, you're courting death. I was just about to cross that golden light and kill you on the other side. I didn't expect you to deliver yourself to me. Kid, you're really arrogant and conceited. Reckless thing, I'll kill you now. Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the three elders all used all kinds of divine abilities to besiege Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's figure was drowned by the overwhelming divine spell light and the colorful sword light and saber light. He was in the heavenly dragon tyrant body state. His body was 10,000 feet tall and shining with golden light. If the target was too big, it would naturally be easier to fall into the trap. However, he didn't dodge. Instead, he put his palms together and expressionlessly used his ultimate technique. Limitless chaos. Following his furious roar, his entire body burst forth with dazzling five-colored divine light, and his entire body became illusory and blurry. The five-colored divine light contained more than a dozen divine Tao laws. Heaven, earth, 5 elements, stars, space, and other powers fused together perfectly. This was the ultimate skill that Ji Tianqing had mastered when he was cultivating in seclusion. This technique was derived from the chaotic heaven secret technique and was a top-notch defensive divine ability. Think about it, the various defensive techniques in this world were nothing more than strengthening oneself and resisting the enemy's attack. Or he could use some techniques and methods to neutralize the enemy's attack power. As for this endless sky of chaos, it was even more profound and unfathomable. After Ji Tianqing used it, his body became illusory, without a physical existence. No matter how powerful the attacks of Long Fun and the others were, they could not touch his true body. The power of various divine abilities and secret techniques would also be absorbed by heaven, earth, 5 elements, stars, and space. No matter how strong the divine lords were, could they destroy heaven, earth, stars, space, and 5 elements? Obviously not. Swoosh, swoosh. In the next moment, the saber light, sword shadows, and divine abilities that blotted out the sky passed through Ji Tianqing without any delay and scattered between heaven and earth. Ji Tianqing's figure still existed, unharmed. The ground below, the surrounding space, and the entire heaven-destroying sword formation were also unaffected. However, those divine abilities collapsed and dissipated, absorbed by heaven, earth, stars, and space. Such a strange scene caused Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others to be stunned with astonishment. They were dumbfounded, as if they had seen a ghost. No matter what, they couldn't understand how Ji Tianqing did it. What the hell? Damn it. How could this be? That kid is too strange. Everyone, be careful. I don't believe that I can't kill him. This must be an illusion. Yes. That kid is very cunning. He must have used some kind of illusion. The few experts did not believe it. They waved their divine weapons again, and used their powerful divine abilities and killing moves. Rumble. The saber light and sword shadows that filled the sky descended again, drowning Ji Tianqing like a monstrous flood. However, the strange scene reappeared again. Countless saber light and sword shadows passed through Ji Tianqing's body and landed on the ground. Of course, the ground wasn't cut into a ravine or a deep pit. Those divine abilities and secret skills collapsed one after another, turning into endless divine light and quickly dissipating. This result made Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others' hands and feet turn cold. Their eyes were full of shock. Everyone was shocked and frightened, and they were at a loss. Damn it! What the hell is going on? How can there be such a strange divine ability in the world? How did he do it? This is definitely not an illusion. Everyone, don't waste your energy. Calm down, everyone must calm down. Let's think of a way together. We'll definitely be able to break his divine ability. The few Sir God powerhouses calmed down very quickly as they used their ultimate techniques and secret skills to check Ji Tianqing's situation. Someone used a soul secret skill to investigate Ji Tianqing's soul aura. Someone used a mysterious eye technique to see through Ji Tianqing's background. There were also people who used the spatial law to break the golden light barrier. This was because they felt that Ji Tianqing's strangeness was related to the sacred light wall. At this moment, the other experts of the He Tian sect also returned to Long Fun's side. They couldn't wait any longer and immediately wanted to besiege Ji Tianqing. However, Long Fun stopped them. He pointed at Ji Tianqing and explained the situation to everyone. That kid is very strange. I don't know what kind of divine ability he used, but he's actually like nothingness. No matter how we attack, he's not affected. The other Sir Gods were also very shocked and found it hard to believe. Someone attacked Ji Tianqing and found that it was useless. This proved that Long Fun was right. Therefore, the dozen or so Sir Gods stopped attacking and surrounded Ji Tianqing to observe carefully, trying to find a flaw. Ji Tianqing was very calm. He stood in the sky expressionlessly with his palms together and maintained the posture of circulating his energy. This was the first time he used the infinite sky of turbidity. He was also testing how long this divine ability could be maintained and how powerful an attack it could withstand. Seeing that Long Fun and the others had stopped, he frowned in dissatisfaction and said in a contemptuous and provocative tone, "You bastards of the He Tian sect, weren't you very arrogant before? Why are you so timid? I just used a little trick and you're scared out of your wits? Is that all you can do? More than a dozen people can't do anything to me? Ha ha! Prince Lian must be very depressed to have a group of trash like you as his trusted aides, right?" The experts of the He Tian sect finally calmed down. They were provoked by Ji Tianqing's words and immediately flew into a rage. They roared and attacked again. Chapter 3099. Kid, you must be tired of living. If I don't tear you to pieces, I'll have lived in vain. Since you're so eager to die, I'll fulfill your wish. You're invincible. Kid, you're already on the path of invincibility. The experts of He Tian sect cursed furiously. They waved their sabers and Kenshin soldiers, besieging Ji Tianqing. Swoosh! Swoosh swoosh! The colorful brilliance of the divine skill once again covered the sky and poured down like a torrential flood. This time, the 13 experts of He Tian sect attacked at the same time, erupting with their strongest combat power. The power of their combined attack actually reached the limit of a Sir God, very close to a God King expert. Even a peak 9th Heaven Divine Lord would be severely injured by it. Ji Tianqing remained unmoved. A satisfied smile flashed across his eyes, and his heart surged with anticipation. Swoosh! The scene from before appeared once again. The earth-shattering divine skill passed through Ji Tianqing without any hindrance and scattered between heaven and earth. Very soon, it collapsed and dissipated. The experts of He Tian sect once again failed to injure Ji Tianqing. Everyone was so angry that they were stamping with rage, but at the same time they felt helpless. If Ji Tianqing maintained his incorporeal state, he would be invincible. They could not injure Ji Tianqing at all, let alone kill him. What should they do? Ji Tianqing was very satisfied with this result and revealed a gratified smile. This move, Infinite Sky of Chaos, is indeed mysterious and unparalleled. Its power is superb. I clearly felt that just now I've already reached the limit of my defense. If their attack power was a little stronger, they might have injured me. This is enough to prove that the limit of Infinite Sky of Chaos is the limit of a Sir God. As long as I use this divine skill, only God King experts can injure me. These thoughts flashed across Ji Tianqing's mind. He had already tested the effect of infinite sky of chaos and the limit of his defense power. With this life-saving trump card, he could do whatever he wanted under the God King realm in the future. Of course, even if he didn't cultivate this divine ability, he still had the heaven-mending pearl, the blood-flame sacred tree, and the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda. He could still do whatever he wanted. At this moment, on the other side of the golden barrier, the battle between Yunyao, Jiku, and the others and the divine beasts was coming to an end. Just now, in the span of 100 breaths, they had actually joined forces to kill over 100 divine beasts. Just a moment ago, the sky was filled with divine beasts the size of mountains. At this moment, the sky was actually very clean. Other than Yunyao, Jiku, and Lin Shui, there was only a rain of blood falling from the sky. Everyone's situation was very good. Basically, no one was injured, but they had used up quite a bit of divine power. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing hurriedly used a divine ability to remove the 1,000-mile-wide golden barrier. Shwa! After the golden barrier disappeared, the pitch-black abyss that separated the sky quickly healed as well. Within the heaven-destroying sword formation, the space within a 10,000-mile radius was restored to its original state. Yunyao, Jiku, Lin Shui, and the others were worried about Ji Tianqing's situation and hurriedly rushed to his side. At this moment, he also stopped using the infinite sky of chaos and returned to his true form from his illusory state. Shua! Yunyao, Jiku, and the others surrounded him and looked at him with concern. Tianqing, are you all right? Brother Tianqing, so many people surrounded you just now. Are you injured? Ji Tianqing waved his hand, indicating that everyone didn't have to worry. Everyone secretly heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that he was unharmed. He was now the backbone of everyone. If anything happened to him, it would shake everyone's will and determination. Ji Tianqing held the Burial of Heaven sword in his hand and pointed at Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others. He sneered and said, "The divine beasts you controlled have all been killed. Now, it's your turn to die." Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others stared at him with vigilance. Their faces were as cold as ice and their bodies were filled with killing intent. Not only were the two of them solemn, but the Right Protector and the few elders also had ugly expressions. Everyone realized that Ji Tianqing's combat strength was stronger than they had imagined. Prince Lian had once said that he had exchanged thousands of blows with Ji Tianqing and had always been suppressing Ji Tianqing. That meant that Ji Tianqing's true strength was inferior to Prince Lian, who was at the 9th level Divine Lord realm. But the current situation was clearly very wrong. Not to mention Prince Lian, even Long Fun, who had a stronger foundation, was not a match for Ji Tianqing. What was going on? In just a short month, Ji Tianqing had broken through again and his strength had soared? Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others shuddered just thinking about it. However, there were still a few weaker elders who did not see any clues. They were still immersed in the strength and transcendent status of the He Tian sect and looked down on Ji Tianqing and the others as usual. A red-haired youth grinned coldly and said, "Kid, although that divine ability of yours is very strange and you were not injured at all after being besieged by us for so long, but you must have used up a lot of divine power to use that divine ability. Now you finally can't hold on and obediently stand out to be beaten, right?" Another green-haired woman holding a divine bow also sneered with a sinister expression and said, "Although the divine beasts controlled by the Left Protector are all dead, it's no big deal. Those 300 over divine beasts were just cannon fodder that she gathered at the last minute in the God-burying mountain range. Our He Tian sect's experts have come out in full force. Killing you is as easy as flipping our hands." There was even a strong young man who was like a black bear who shouted with a sinister smile, "Tianqing, if you're still a man, surrender and die yourself. Don't implicate others. Look at your companions, those 4 rare beauties. They were implicated by you and died, turning into minced dregs. What a waste of God's gifts." As long as you surrender, we can consider sparing the 4 of them." Hearing the words of the 3 young elders, Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Lin Shui, and the others all had cold eyes and strong killing intent. Even Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and a few of the older elders frowned and revealed astonished expressions. They didn't expect the 3 young elders to be so short-sighted. They did not realize that the situation had been reversed, and they were in a dangerous situation. Ji Tianqing spoke. He secretly shook his head and glanced at the 3 young elders with eyes full of sympathy. His tone was full of pity as he said, "You are so stupid, but you can live until today and even become the elders of the He Tian sect. This really puzzles me. Perhaps it's a kind of happiness for you to continue being so stupid." No matter how stupid the 3 young elders were, they could sense that the atmosphere was not right. They were ashamed and angry, but they did not dare to flare up on the spot. They hurriedly looked at Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others with inquiring eyes. Their expressions seemed to be saying, "What's going on? Weren't we sure of victory and could easily kill Tianqing? Why do you all look so guilty and worried? Could it be that your overflowing confidence and aggressiveness before the operation were all fake? But we took it seriously." Chapter 3100. The 3 young elders had yet to recover from their shock. Ji Tianqing did not waste any more time. He formed a seal with his left hand and controlled the heaven-destroying sword array to attack. Swoosh! Swoosh swoosh! Thousands of divine golden swords, with an indestructible power, slashed toward the experts of the He Tian sect. Every sword light was like a meteor. When thousands of sacred golden swords gathered together, it was like a gorgeous meteor shower. The 13 experts from the He Tian sect were instantly drowned by the brilliant sword light and were suppressed by the violent sword essence. Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the others' expressions changed drastically. They quickly fought back and resisted. Even the young elders turned pale with fright. They tried their best to use their divine abilities and consummate skills to block the sword light that filled the sky. They finally understood the reason when they felt the power of the sacred golden swords. No wonder the sect master and the guardians looked so pale. Boom! 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 The sword light that filled the sky came crashing down. A deafening sound burst out and resounded through the sky. Everyone was enveloped by the dazzling sacred golden swords. The few young elders were relatively weaker. After blocking the sword light for a few dozen times, they were injured by the sacred golden swords. They screamed and flew out, spilling blood all over the sky. Once they started to get injured, they would reveal their flaws and gaps. More sacred golden swords would attack, making it harder for them to block. Only Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the right guardian could block the attack of the sacred golden swords and were not injured. After all, the 3 of them were above the 8th degree realm. The other 10 elders were all 7th and 6th heaven realm Sir God. They could not block for long before they were injured by the sacred golden sword. Hideous wounds appeared on their bodies and blood spilled all over the ground. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Lin Shui, and the others all performed their remarkable skills and launched a fierce attack on the experts from the He Tian sect. Demon Blood Sky Slash Blade. Lin Shui held the demon sword and rushed out first, slashing out blood-red sword light that filled the sky. Heavenly Star 9 Swords. World-burning God Annihilation. Yun Yao and Ji Ku were also very brave. They brandished the Source Stone Divine Sword and Divine Halberd, splashing out sword light and divine flames that covered the sky. Raging Dragon Storm Fist. Zhen Hong, who was thousands of meters tall, also blasted out an incomparably violent fist aura with surging blood flames. Shui Huan, Gold Left Emissary, and Blood Dragon Right Emissary also used their ultimate skills. The God Lord powerhouses of He Tian sect were all filled with grief and indignation. They had no choice but to counterattack with all their might. Thus, the final battle began. The numerous Divine Lord powerhouses launched a fierce clash within the Heaven Extermination sword formation. The colorful divine spells collided with each other in the sky, creating deafening noises. Destructive divine power shockwaves spread out like ripples, covering a radius of 10,000 miles. Billions of shards of divine light fell from the sky like snowflakes and sprinkled on the battlefield. Everyone dashed forward without any regard for their own safety, doing their best and using their trump cards. There was no victory or defeat in this battle, only life and death. Long Fun, who was the strongest, stared at Ji Tianxing and charged forward with all his might. Ji Tianxing relied on his strong defense and endless divine power to fight him head-on. He was not at a disadvantage at all. The two of them exchanged a few hundred blows, but Long Fun was still unable to kill Ji Tianxing. On the other hand, his entire body was covered in wounds and dripping with divine blood. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was only slightly injured. His divine power was still abundant, and his combat strength was maintained at peak condition. Seeing this, the Right Guardian and Granny Beast Tamer hurried to help. The two of them fought side by side with Long Fun and joined forces to attack Ji Tianxing. In this way, they finally suppressed Ji Tianxing and gained a slight upper hand. However, Ji Tianxing quickly stabilized himself with the help of the Heaven Extermination sword formation. After the two of them exchanged 1,000 blows, he stabilized the situation and fought to a draw with Long Fun and the other two. The four of them fought with each other and were constantly injured. As time passed, their injuries continued to worsen, and their strength was rapidly draining. However, Ji Tianxing's self-healing ability was extremely strong, and with the divine power provided by the Heaven Mending Pearl, his strength was endless. The longer this battle dragged on, the more obvious his advantage became. On the other side, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Lin Shui, and the others fought against the 10 elders of the He Tian sect. Originally, they could not defeat the elders of the He Tian sect. Only Lin Shui and God Lord Blood Illusion had the strongest combat strength, reaching the 8th level of the Divine Lord realm. The other's strength was lower than the elders of the He Tian sect. However, Lin Shui and God Lord Blood Illusion worked together to hold back the 5 elders of the He Tian sect and were not at a disadvantage. Zhen Hong, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Left Emissary Jin, and Blood Dragon Right Emissary dealt with the other 5 elders with all their might. The 5 elders were suppressed by the Heaven Extermination sword formation and were already heavily injured. Their combat strength was greatly reduced. As such, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were able to cope and gradually gained the upper hand. After both sides fought for 15 minutes, Zhen Hong took the lead and killed a young elder. Then, Yun Yao used her supreme divine power and secret skill to crush an elder into powder. The 5 of them had a great advantage against the remaining 3 elders. There was no suspense in the outcome. After both sides fought for 30 minutes, the 3 elders' divine bodies were destroyed. The severely injured divine sparks wanted to escape, but Ji Ku caught up with them and shattered 2 divine sparks on the spot. The other divine sparks were also stopped by Left Emissary Jin. Everyone worked together to shatter it. Through this battle, the 5 of them formed a tacit understanding. After a short rest, they went to help Lin Shui and God Lord Blood Illusion. Lin Shui and God Lord Blood Illusion were both injured. Their robes were stained with blood, and they looked a little miserable. However, the 5 elders on the other side were not in a good condition either. Their robes were torn, their hair was disheveled, their faces were covered with blood, and their bodies were covered with wounds. The only fortunate thing was that the 5 elders were still alive. However, this outcome was about to be disrupted. As Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others joined the battle, the situation was completely overturned. 7 Sir God experts joined forces to besiege the 5 elders of Heaven Extermination sect. Moreover, the 5 elders were suppressed by the Heaven Extermination sword formation and were heavily injured. The outcome of this battle was beyond doubt. Of course, Yun Yao, Lin Shui, and the others were victorious. They killed the 5 elders one by one. Not only did they destroy their divine bodies, but even their divine sparks did not manage to escape. They were crushed into pieces on the spot. The earth-shattering battle of gods came to an end. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, all the mountains, rivers, and forests had been turned upside down and destroyed hundreds of times. At a glance, it had become a desert that was filled with ravines and abysses. Everyone channeled their powers to suppress their injuries and consumed divine elixirs to recover their divine power. Then, they charged towards the sky energetically to help Ji Tianqing. They besieged Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the Right Guardian. At that moment, Ji Tianqing was still lightly injured. His fighting power was still very strong. As for Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the Right Guardian, their injuries were more serious. Their fighting power had decreased tremendously. When Yun Yao, Lin Shui, and the others joined the battle, the outcome was already decided. Chapter 3101. Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, and the others. A total of 8 Divine Lord powerhouses joined forces to attack Long Fun, Granny Beast Tamer, and the Right Guardian. In addition, the suppression of the heaven-destroying sword formation weakened the combat strength of Long Fun and the other 2. Therefore, this battle only lasted for an hour before it was declared to have ended. The first to be killed by everyone was Granny Beast Tamer. Her best ability was to control all kinds of divine beasts to help her in battle. However, those 300 divine beasts had already been destroyed by Ji Tianqing, Lin Shui, and the others. This was equivalent to cutting off her fangs. Her combat strength was naturally greatly reduced. After Granny Beast Tamer was killed, Long Fun and the Right Guardian's situation became even more dangerous. Their injuries were even more miserable. Their hair was disheveled and their faces were dirty. Their bodies were covered in blood and wounds. Where was the demeanor of a powerhouse? In less than 15 minutes, the Right Guardian followed in Granny Beast Tamer's footsteps and was killed by everyone. Not only did his divine body collapse and return to the world, even his divine spark was cut into more than a dozen pieces and put away by Ji Tianqing. Only Long Fun was left to fight alone, resisting the siege of Ji Tianqing and the others. He was indeed worthy of being the sect master of the He Tian sect, a 9th-level divine lord powerhouse. Not only was his divine power vigorous and long, but he had also mastered more than 140 divine Tao laws. Moreover, he was proficient in thousands of divine abilities and secret skills, and all kinds of killing moves were endless. Therefore, killing him was the most troublesome and difficult. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Zhen Hong, Left Emissary Jin, and Blood Dragon Right Emissary were much weaker than Long Fun. It was very difficult for them to cause too much damage to Long Fun with their divine abilities and ultimate skills. Most of the attacks were neutralized by Long Fun. Even if a few divine abilities and secret skills hit Long Fun, they could only cause him some minor injuries. On the other hand, Long Fun's desperate counterattack caused Zhen Hong, Ji Ku, and the others to suffer different degrees of injuries. Helpless, they could only retreat to a distance to heal their injuries. The main force that truly dealt with Long Fun was Ji Tianqing, Lin Shui, and Blood Illusion. As a result, the time dragged on for an exceptionally long time. After fighting for an entire hour, more than half of Long Fun's divine power was consumed, and his injuries were extremely serious. Only then did Ji Tianqing detonate the poison he had planted a long time ago. Following a muffled bang, Long Fun's divine body violently trembled as blood spurted out of his 7 orifices. The 3 types of poisons had been lurking in his body for an hour. It had already corroded his internal organs, meridians, god blood, and godhead. As a result, once it was triggered, it was unstoppable and directly destroyed his divine body. Under people's attentive gazes, his god body withered and corroded at a speed visible to the naked eye. He turned into black ashes and scattered in the sky. Only a single divine bead was left. It was also infected with dark green and dark blue poison, flickering with dim divine light. It was obvious that Longfin's godhead had also been corroded by the poison, and he had suffered heavy injuries. His divine soul was extremely weak, and his divine power was also extremely lacking. Ji Tianqing stared fixedly at the godhead. When he saw that the walnut-sized, diamond-shaped godhead was covered in fine law runes, he was astonished. This Longfen is really a pleasant surprise. There are actually more than 150 types of divine Tao laws fused in his godhead. No wonder his combat strength is so formidable. He was sealed by the heaven-exterminating sword formation, but he could still withstand our besiegement and hold on for so long. Ji Tianqing was certain that Longfen was the strongest person he had encountered since coming to the divine realm. Even the top genius, Prince Lian, did not have as deep a foundation as Longfen. His godhead, this lord wants it for sure. A cold light flashed across Ji Tianqing's eyes, and he made up his mind. Following that, he, Lin Shui, and God Lord Blood Illusion attacked with all their might, besieging Longfen's godhead. Longfen was indeed powerful. Even if he only had one godhead left, he could still execute all sorts of divine abilities and secret skills, tenaciously resisting. Both sides exchanged dozens of blows, fighting until the sky turned dark. Fragments of divine light splattered everywhere. However, no matter how tenaciously Longfen resisted, he was still fighting like a trapped beast. In the end, he still could not block the divine might of the Burial of Heaven sword and was hacked into pieces by the sword. Kacha! A crisp cracking sound rang out. 12 godhead fragments flew out, scattering in the air. This scene drew a full stop to this intense and magnificent battle of divine lords. The great battle finally ended. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Ji Tianqing waved his hand, grabbing the dozen over godhead fragments in his palm, and put them away into his interspatial ring. Then, he waved his palm and fired out a divine seal, dispelling the heaven-exterminating sword formation. Swoosh! The golden light sword formation that enveloped a radius of 10,000 miles instantly disappeared without a trace. Everyone reappeared under the night sky. The surrounding 10,000 miles had become a desert covered in yellow sand. Even further away in the dark night, the black silhouettes of undulating mountains could be faintly seen. The biting cold night wind attacked, but it did not make everyone feel cold. Instead, they became even more clear-headed and spirited. Everyone ignored their injuries and surrounded Ji Tianqing, looking at him with excitement, expressing the shock in their hearts. My God! We actually won. More than 300 divine beasts and 13 divine lord powerhouses ambushed us here, and we actually won. It's more than just winning. We killed all the divine beasts and all the enemies, but we didn't die. This is a complete victory. Those were the strongest powerhouses in the He Tian sect. From the sect leader and the 2 guardians to the 10 elders, they were all killed by us. Now, there is only one deputy sect leader left in the He Tian sect of Bloody Flame Holy Kingdom. The rest of the experts were all killed by us. The He Tian sect is finished. Ha ha ha! Tonight's battle is simply shocking and glorious. It's enough to be recorded in the annals of history. I still can't believe that we actually did it. Mr. Tianqing is simply the reincarnation of a divine lord. Only Yun Yao and Ji Ku could remain calm, looking at him with a smile. After all, they were Ji Tianqing's wives. They had seen him create too many miracles, so they were already used to it. However, this was the first time Lin Shui, Sir God Blood Illusion, and the rest had fought a great battle after following Ji Tianqing. Tonight, not only did they broaden their horizons, they also had a deeper understanding of Ji Tianqing. Most importantly, they were even more convinced of Ji Tianqing's strength and his position as a core member. This team that was formed not long ago became more united after this battle. Ji Tianqing was more indifferent. He waved his hand to signal everyone to be quiet and said, This is just a normal operation. You all don't have to make a fuss. In the future, when we roam the boundless heaven continent, we will often encounter such things. It'll be fine when you all get used to it. Don't be in a hurry to flatter and praise each other. Everyone has suffered serious injuries. It's better to quickly heal your injuries. Everyone obeyed him, and hurriedly nodded their heads in agreement. Following that, Lin Shui took out the ship. Everyone boarded the divine ship one after another and left the barren battlefield. Chapter 3102. A mountain peak that was thousands of feet tall stood alone in the night. In the belly of the mountain, there was a cave that had been dug by man. In the dark cave, a divine warship that was 100 feet long was parked. This was Lin Shui's warship. However, its size had shrunk 100 times. Ji Tianqing, Lin Shui, and the others each occupied a secret room and began to circulate their energy to heal their injuries. When they were on the way just now, everyone gathered in the meeting hall. Everyone's eyes were gathered on Yun Yao and Ji Ku. Looking at them up close, everyone could see their faces clearly and feel their unique temperaments. Immediately, everyone was even more shocked and envious, and they treated them as the perfect Jiutian goddesses. Lin Shui was the first to lose it. She asked Ji Tianqing with a smile, "Young Master Tianqing, don't you plan to introduce these two beauties to everyone?" Ji Tianqing originally thought that everyone was well aware of this, so there was no need for him to do anything unnecessary. However, when Lin Shui mentioned it in front of everyone, Godlord Blood Illusion, Left Emissary Jean, and the others also nodded happily to express their anticipation. Thus, Ji Tianqing officially introduced Yun Yao and Ji Ku to everyone. After he finished the introduction, everyone was finally sure of their identities. Moreover, everyone knew that Yun Yao was Ji Tianqing's first wife and had given birth to a son and a daughter for him. The cute fairy-like girl that had appeared in the Bloodfire Kingdom's imperial city was their daughter, Ji Wushuang. As for their son, Ji Tianqing did not mention him. Everyone did not think too much about it. They only thought that Ji Wuhan was cultivating in seclusion in some divine artifact like Wushuang. After introducing Yun Yao and Ji Ku, Ji Tianqing introduced everyone to them. In this way, the two sides got to know each other. Yun Yao was very dignified and elegant, and she was also quite magnanimous. She also expressed her welcome and gratitude that everyone could trust Ji Tianqing and follow and help Ji Tianqing. From now on, we will be friends and partners. We will share blessings and hardships together. Ji Ku also said a few simple words to greet everyone. Through this short period of time, Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, and the others could see the personalities of Yun Yao and Ji Ku. The two of them had very distinct personalities. One of them was dignified and elegant, like the bright moon in the ninth heaven. One of them was cheerful and lively, noble yet playful, like the scorching sun in the ninth heaven. All in all, Yun Yao and Ji Ku's perfect looks and bearing made everyone admire them very much. They also felt a little ashamed of their inferiority. For the next few days, the divine warship remained hidden in the cave, not revealing any of its aura. Shuelin, Zhen Hong, and the others were all healing their wounds in the secret chamber of the divine ship. As for Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku, they returned to the distorted space-time of the Jiutian Tenju Tower. The time here was 50 times faster, so it was more convenient for them to recuperate in seclusion. Only 2 days had passed in the outside world, but they had been recuperating for more than 3 months. Their wounds were all healed, and they had recovered to their peak state. Then, Yun Yao and Ji Ku continued to cultivate and further improve their strength. Ji Tianqing took out the godhead fragments of the Hetian sex experts and began to refine them. The god-burying mountain range was as peaceful as ever. The ambush of the Hetian sex experts on Ji Tianqing and the others didn't cause much of a stir. After all, this operation was top secret and only a few people knew about it. And when they were fighting fiercely in the god-burying mountain range, no one passed by or watched. Therefore, the billions of gods in the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom didn't know that Ji Tianqing had left. They also didn't know that he had created another miracle and destroyed the 13 experts of the Hetian sect. Only the major sects in the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom vaguely sensed that something was wrong. The Hetian sect, which had always maintained a transcendent status, suddenly became unusually low-key and restrained. Not only did they suspend many of their businesses, but they also withdrew countless elite. The entire Hetian sect was not as open and confident as before. They seemed to be very cautious. The leaders of the major sects sent out scouts and secret talks to investigate the Hetian sect. However, the Hetian sect protected the news extremely strictly. It could be said that not a drop of water leaked out. Even their defensive power was several times stronger than before. Logically speaking, the major sects should be disappointed that they didn't find out any information. However, the leaders of those forces were all extremely shrewd experts. They immediately realized that something must have happened to the Hetian sect. Moreover, it was an earth-shattering matter. The more strictly the Hetian sect protected the news, the more serious the matter was. However, no one knew what had happened to the Hetian sect or what had happened to them. Gradually, two sects couldn't hold back their doubts and suspicions and began to take action. They sent out some experts and elites to deliberately create trouble to test the Hetian sect's strength. According to the usual practice, the Hetian sect would never take them seriously and would directly counterattack. However, it was very strange this time. The Hetian sect actually swallowed their anger. The two sects became more and more unscrupulous, increasing the harassment and provocation. The result still didn't change. The Hetian sect continued to endure and even withdrew their defenses. After the news spread, the major sects all understood what was going on. Something big had indeed happened to the Hetian sect. The sect's strength was empty, and the experts had withered. Thus, the major sects turned into drooling beasts and began to nibble away at the Hetian sect's businesses and resources. Everyone knew that the Hetian sect was the #1 sect and had the most abundant resource reserves and wealth. If they could swallow this fat piece of meat, they could replace it and take advantage of the situation to rise. Therefore, the major sects were not willing to be outdone and did their best to snatch and divide. Of course, there was no lack of the second prince and the third prince's instructions. They had the support of the major sects behind them, so how could they let go of this excellent opportunity? At the same time, in the royal city of the Raging Flame Divine Country, in a magnificent palace, in a dimly lit secret room that was filled with divine power, a young man wearing a black robe with a golden dragon pattern was sitting in a 5-colored divine pool filled with divine liquid. He closed his eyes and circulated his energy to heal his injuries. His palms were clasped together and his eyes were closed. His whole body emitted a noble and dignified aura. This was Prince Lien. After the battle with Ji Tianxing, he was also seriously injured and unable to fight again. He knew that he had failed and that his momentum was gone. Next, the Bloodfire Divine Country would usher in a huge change in strength. Thus, he quietly left the Bloodfire Divine Country and came to the royal city of the Raging Flame Divine Country, hiding there to heal his injuries. Many years ago, he had made arrangements for the Raging Flame Divine Country and carried out a series of schemes and plans. The current Raging Flame Divine Country not only had a large number of his trusted subordinates, but there were also a few powerful forces. Compared to his hometown, the Great Yen Empire, only the Raging Flame Divine Country and the Hetian sect's headquarters could be called his base. After more than a month of seclusion, his injuries had recovered by 50%. The hideous wounds all over his body had already healed and formed scabs. At this time, he was using some kind of divine art to heal his internal and bone injuries. Mobile version update website M. Chapter 3103. Divine light surged in the secret room, and divine power was abundant like rain. Only Prince Lien was healing his wounds, and the secret room was very quiet. But at this moment, The pitch-black door of the secret room lit up with a dazzling golden light and let out a series of beeping sounds. Prince Lien, who was circulating his energy to heal his wounds, was immediately awakened. He knew that something big must have happened. Only the trusted guard guarding the door of the secret room would activate the array to inform him. Otherwise, no one would dare to rashly disturb him, as they would be sentenced to death. Prince Lien finished circulating his energy and waved his hand, sending out a dark green divine light that covered the stone door of the secret room. Whoosh! With a flash of green light, the array was activated, and the door of the secret room slowly opened. A tall god in golden armor with a helmet covering his face quickly walked into the secret chamber. This was a high divine lord, one of Prince Lien's trusted guards. He walked to the edge of the divine pool and stood respectfully. He bowed and reported, "This subordinate, Lien Heir, greets your highness." "Lien Heir, why have you disturbed this king?" Prince Lien looked at the golden-armored divine lord with a dignified gaze. His eyes were filled with anticipation, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a sinister sneer. "Is there news from the god-burying mountain range?" The Lien Heir hurriedly nodded and replied in a sonorous voice, "Your Highness is right. This subordinate was about to report this matter." Hearing this, Prince Lien let out a long sigh of relief. He leaned against the edge of the divine pool in a relaxed posture and sneered with a smug face, "Ha ha ha. As expected, you didn't disappoint this king." This king used all the strength of the Blood Flame branch, a dozen divine lords, and even Long Fun personally took action. Tian Xing, that little B** starred. No matter how capable he was, how could he not die? No matter how cunning and treacherous he is, how can he escape from this king's calculations? Prince Lien appeared to be very pleased with himself, as if he had a card up his sleeve. After a few cold laughs, he sighed with some depression and regret. Sigh. "It's a pity that this king wasn't there and didn't see with my own eyes how he was blasted to pieces. It's a pity that I couldn't personally give him the final blow and send him to the Yellow Springs." The Lien Heir stood respectfully, but when he heard Prince Lien's words, his expression immediately changed. His expression was very ugly, and his eyes were filled with anxiety and fear. Even his body couldn't help but tremble. But he could only stand there, not daring to interrupt Prince Lien. He could guess that Prince Lien was feeling proud of himself. How furious would he be after knowing the truth? At that time, he would see Prince Lien's humiliated and embarrassed side. He would definitely become the scapegoat to vent his anger. Even if he didn't lose his life, he would probably lose a layer of skin, right? At this moment, Prince Lien's gaze fell on him. He frowned in confusion and asked, "Lien Heir, why are you shaking?" "Your Highness." The Lien Heir's voice was hoarse as he replied, his body trembling even more. Prince Lien vaguely felt that something was wrong. With a gloomy expression, he asked, "Is there a problem? Speak." "Your Highness." The Lien Heir swallowed a mouthful of saliva and mustered up a great deal of courage. His voice trembled as he said, "Just now, this subordinate received a message from Lord Longfun. Lord Longfun said that the plan this time..." Prince Lien's expression immediately changed. His entire face was as black as the bottom of a pot. His eyes narrowed fiercely, flashing with a cold light. Although he had already guessed the answer, he still bellowed in a low voice, "Continue. What's the plan?" The Lien Heir was so frightened by Prince Lien's anger that his face turned pale and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. But he still forced himself to hold on. With a heart that was unafraid of death, he continued, "Lord Longfun said that they successfully ambushed Tianxing and his companions. But after fighting for an hour, they still failed in the end. Not only were all the elders and protectors killed by the enemy, even he himself. I'm afraid that it would be difficult for him to survive." The Lien Heir used all his strength to finish speaking. Then, he lowered his head as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He closed his eyes and waited for death. The secret chamber was dead silent. Not a single sound could be heard. The expected rage and roar did not come. The Lien heir quietly raised his head and saw that Prince Lien was stunned. His body was stiff as he sat in the deity's pool. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He was so angry that it was twisted and the veins on his forehead were bulging. His eyes were fixed on the surface of the water, and he did not move for a long time. "It's over." The Lien heir was filled with despair and mourned silently in his heart. He knew very well that this news was a huge blow to Prince Lien. As expected, after a long time, Prince Lien came back to his senses. His eyes were bloodshot with anger as he roared in a hoarse voice, "Why? Why did it fail? How could it have failed? What were those monarchs doing? Was Long Fun's 9th-degree realm strength fake? So many monarchs, and they even set up an ambush in advance. How could they not kill a beast of a foreign race? Was he really that powerful? Was he sent by Haotien to be my enemy?" Grand Prince Lien was so angry that he was about to go crazy. He erupted like a volcano. Ah! He clenched his fists so tightly that they creaked. He roared at the top of his lungs. Instantly, the entire secret chamber shook violently. The deity's lake that was 10 feet wide also splashed with colorful waves. Countless drops of deity's lake evaporated into a thick mist. Prince Lien's anger caused the entire deity's lake to boil. The Lien heir was scared out of his wits. He hurriedly knelt and kowtowed. With a sobbing voice, he advised, "Your Highness, please calm down. This is just a temporary loss. We will definitely take revenge. You are still injured. Please calm down." Prince Lien suddenly turned his head and glared at the Lien heir with bloodshot eyes. He was unable to restrain his anger and punched out. "Scram! You bastard, do you really want to see me make a fool of myself?" With a muffled bang, the Lien heir was sent flying by the punch. Blood spurted out of his 7 orifices as he flew back dozens of feet. He smashed into the door of the secret chamber and rolled on the ground far away. However, after he stopped, he did not bother to check on his injuries. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Prince Lien. "Thank you for sparing my life, Your Highness. I am so grateful." Prince Lien remained silent. He waved his hand and sent out a ray of divine light to close the door of the secret chamber. Bang! Only then did the Lien heir crawl up with lingering fear. He sat cross-legged on the ground and began to heal his injuries. The secret chamber fell into silence. Prince Lien sat in the deity's lake like a stone statue. He gradually calmed down. He frowned and pondered. His eyes flashed with a cold light and murderous intent. After a few minutes, he finally closed his eyes and ended his contemplation. Long Fun's operation failed. The Blood Flame Divine Kingdom's branch is considered destroyed. However, that bastard managed to escape this disaster. This means that his strength has increased again. Moreover, the lackeys that followed him were definitely capable as well. I cannot underestimate or be careless. I must give it my all. Furthermore, he had to kill him before he entered the Great Yen Empire. Otherwise, once he enters the Great Yen Empire, he will definitely cause a huge commotion. Chapter 3104. Outside the secret chamber was a dimly lit passageway. The Lien heir sat cross-legged on the ground, silently channeling to heal his injuries. At this moment, the sound of light footsteps could be heard, approaching from afar. The Lien heir immediately stopped channeling, opened his eyes, and turned to look. He saw a tall and burly figure in purple robes walking over from not far away. It was a middle-aged god who was as strong as a bear and was 20 feet tall. He wore an exquisite purple robe embroidered with golden patterns and dragon and elephant patterns. There was also a special emblem on his chest. This person's skin was purplish-black and his head was huge and hairless. His shiny scalp shone with a purple light in the darkness and his bell-sized eyes shone with a cold light. He had a wide face and nose and a flat and wide mouth. His aura was very strong and he exuded a dignified aura. But at this moment, he was furious and his cheeks were contorted in anger, accompanied by surging killing intent. Seeing that the purple-robed Baldy had arrived, the Lien heir immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. Lien heir greets Sect Master Purple G. Although the Lien heir was one of Prince Lien's trusted guards, he was honored to have his original surname abolished and was given the surname Lien by Prince Lien. He was ranked second in terms of strength and status. This was a great honor. However, compared to this purple-robed Baldy, the Lien heir's status was still too low. Because this big Baldy was the sect master of the Raging Flames Divine Country. In the Raging Flames Divine Country, there were also 7 top sections. The Heavenly Union sect was also fully deserving of being the #1 faction with a transcendent status. The sect master Purple G glanced at the Lien heir and walked to the door of the secret chamber. He said solemnly, "I request to see the prince." The Lien heir nodded to show that he understood and said respectfully, "Please wait a moment, Lord Purple G. The prince is in a fit of anger, please wait a moment." He had just been sent flying by Prince Lien and was afraid that the prince's anger had not subsided. If he went to touch the prince's head at this time and got punched again, he might not be able to keep his life. However, Sect Master Purple Extreme was very impatient. With a black face, he said in a deep voice, "Don't waste time. I have an extremely important matter." The Lien heir was very helpless and could only brace himself to step forward and reporting to Your Highness, Sect Master Ziji requests an audience. Prince Lien's voice came from the secret chamber, "Let him in." Then, the door of the secret chamber slowly opened. Lien heir glanced over and saw Grand Prince Lien sitting in the deity's lake. His expression had returned to normal. Only then did he feel much more at ease. Sect Master Ziji strode into the chamber and walked straight to the deity's pool, bowing to Grand Prince Lien. "Greetings, Your Highness." Grand Prince Lien waved his hand and shot out a divine light to close the door of the secret room. He stared at Sect Master Ziji with a dignified gaze, asking in a low voice, "You've already received the news?" Sect Master Ziji nodded and said with a sorrowful and indignant expression, "Long Fun is my junior brother and my only friend. No matter what methods that bastard Tianqing used, no matter how strong he was still able to defeat him. Since he killed Long Fun, he is my mortal enemy. I will personally lead the experts of my sect and charge into the God-burying mountain range to tear that bastard into pieces." Sect Master Ziji's emotions were very agitated and his tone was indignant. His entire body was filled with killing intent that soared to the heavens. Grand Prince Lien frowned and said calmly, "Ziji, of course I know that you and Long Fun are as close as brothers. It's normal for you to want to avenge Long Fun. However, Long Fun and the 12 divine lords under him were all killed by Tianqing. It can be seen that the brat's strength far exceeds our expectations. He must have some unknown methods and secret. Even if you lead the protectors and elders to kill him, you might not be able to defeat him, let alone kill him." Sect Master Ziji said firmly, "I believe that although that brat killed Long Fun, it was definitely not an easy victory. He must be severely injured as well. The God-burying mountain range is extremely dangerous. That brat definitely won't dare to continue traversing and will most likely hide in the God-burying mountain range to recuperate. At this time, if I lead the experts of my sect to find him, he will definitely die." Grand Prince Lien nodded slightly and said, "That's right. Your analysis is very reasonable. However, the God-burying mountain range is vast and that brat is extremely cautious and cunning. Where are you going to find him? If you split up and search and he catches the opportunity, you might be defeated one by one. Have you considered these problems?" This. Sect Master Ziji was speechless and revealed an awkward expression. He had just received the news of Long Fin's death and was furious and sorrowful. He hurriedly rushed to see Grand Prince Lien. How could he have the time to consider so much? Grand Prince Lien continued, "Zg, I can understand your feelings. How could I not want to grind his bones and scatter his ashes? However, we have already failed twice. We should learn from our experience and not act rashly again. Otherwise, not only will we not achieve our goal, we will also become more and more passive." Sect Master Zg pursed his lips and said with a nod, "Your Highness is right. This subordinate indeed lacked consideration. I believe Your Highness already has a countermeasure. This subordinate is willing to hear the details." Grand Prince Lien's expression was solemn as he said in a solemn tone, "The God-burying mountain range is vast and dangerous. It is not suitable to be a battlefield. Only the raging flame divine kingdom, under our control and surveillance, is an excellent battlefield and also his burial ground. This time, I will gather all my strength and weave an inescapable net, condense a god-slaying sword, and give him a fatal blow. Once we strike, we can only succeed. Failure is not allowed." Sect Master Zg was infected by his powerful aura and his eyes lit up. He nodded heavily and said, "Your Highness is far-sighted. We will definitely succeed in one strike." Grand Prince Lien waved his hand and instructed, "You may leave. Wait for my orders in peace." Sect Master Zg acknowledged the order and asked again, "Your Highness, are you really not planning to send people to the periphery of the god-burying mountain range to intercept and kill that brat? What if we meet him while waiting for him, and he is seriously injured?" Grand Prince Lien sneered, "This chance is very slim. He is not that stupid. However, I will arrange for people from Sacred Fire Sect and Surging Wave Palace to ambush at the periphery of the god-burying mountain range. If there is a chance to kill him, that would be for the best. Even if there is no chance to kill him, we can still monitor his movements and traces." Sect Master Zg breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. "Your Highness is indeed wise. You have long grasped the overall situation and are far-sighted." After a few words of flattery, Sect Master Zg bowed and left the secret chamber. Only Grand Prince Lien was left in the secret chamber. Silence was restored. He took out several transmission jade slips and entered several orders into them, sending them to different people. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh! The jade slips transformed into several rays of light and quickly disappeared. Grand Prince Lien murmured expressionlessly, "It is fine if I don't attack, but once I do, I can only use my full strength. I hope that the raging flame divine kingdom will be his burial ground. We must not let him cross the raging flame divine kingdom and enter the great Yen Empire." Chapter 3105. Unknowingly, half a month passed. After 15 days of circulating energy and healing, Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, and the rest's injuries were basically no longer a problem. Everyone finished healing and headed to the Divine Ship's meeting hall to gather. Yun Yao and Ji Ku were still in the distorted spacetime of the Divine Pagoda, silently cultivating in seclusion. With incomparably rich resources and the replenishment of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree's power, their strength improved very quickly. Half a month had passed in the outside world, but they had already cultivated in the distorted spacetime for 2 years. It was the same for Ji Tianxing. In these 2 years, he had completely refined the Godhead fragments of more than 10 heavenly sect experts. Not only had he absorbed a massive amount of divine power, he had also refined 29 types of divine Tao laws. These 29 types of laws were basically divine Tao laws that only divine lords could cultivate. More than half of them came from Long Fun. The divine Tao laws that the other 12 divine lords had mastered were mostly of lower grades, and their effects and power were not too outstanding. Only the divine Tao laws that Long Fun had mastered were of a higher grade, and their power and effects were extraordinary. This greatly benefited Ji Tianxing, and his harvest was rather bountiful. Currently, the number of divine Tao laws that he had mastered had reached more than 280. This was an extremely terrifying number. Throughout the entire Great Yen Empire, there was no expert who could master so many divine Tao laws. In fact, those with more than 200 types of laws were as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. In Ji Tianxing's memory, in the divine world 1,000 years ago, generally, only divine king experts would master more than 200 types of divine Dao laws. In this era, even if the overall standard was higher than back then, there would not be too much of a difference. 280 types of laws is almost comparable to a first or second level divine king expert. My current combat strength has increased by about 3 times compared to before. It's a pity that I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to break through to the 7th stage and become a high-ranking divine lord. Otherwise, I should be invincible below the divine king level. Ji Tianxing ended his cultivation and muttered to himself, feeling somewhat regretful. But he also understood that his strength was too terrifying, and it was harder for him to break through compared to other divine lords. If he did not have too great of an opportunity, it would probably be very difficult for him to step into the 7th stage and become a high-ranking divine lord. He calculated the time, and everyone's injuries should have recovered, so he left the distorted spacetime. Shwa! With a flash of light, Ji Tianxing returned to the secret chamber. He put away the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and left the secret room, heading to the meeting hall alone. Yun Yao and Ji Ku were still at a critical juncture of their cultivation, so it was not appropriate for them to come out for the time being. When Ji Tianxing arrived at the meeting hall, Xue Lin, Zhen Hong, and Xue Huan were already waiting for him. When he stepped into the hall, everyone's eyes gathered on him, carefully sizing him up. Ji Tianxing stood in the middle of the hall. Seeing everyone staring at him, he couldn't help but touch his cheeks and straighten his clothes. Is there a flower on my face? Or did he wear the wrong clothes? Why are you all staring at me like that? Everyone chuckled when they heard this teasing. Xue Lin stared at him with burning eyes and asked curiously, "Kid, why do I feel that your strength has increased a lot?" Zhen Hong also nodded and said in agreement, "Young master's strength and aura are unfathomable and unpredictable. After recuperating in seclusion this time, your strength has become as vast as the sky and as vast as the stars." Left Emissary Jean smiled and said jokingly, "Young master, don't tell me you broke through another cultivation level? If you break through 1 cultivation level every month, you will become a divine king when we enter the Great Yin Empire. By then, you will be able to dominate the entire Great Yin Empire and sit firmly on the throne." In the outside world, such words were taboo and could even be punished for a serious crime. Left Emissary Jean would never speak carelessly under normal circumstances. However, this was Xue Lin's divine battleship, and they were all friends who had gone through life and death battles together. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said with a smile, "Break through 1 cultivation level every month? How can it be so exaggerated? If such a monster really appeared, he would definitely become the public enemy of the entire world. As for the throne of the Great Yin Empire, already becoming a divine king powerhouse, who would still set their sights on a mere throne? You should set your sights on the entire Tianbei region and become the region lord who rules over thousands of gods. You should even dominate the entire boundless heaven continent and become the overlord who rules over the entire continent." The meeting hall fell silent instantly. Everyone's eyes widened as they stared at Ji Tianxing dumbfoundedly, as if they were petrified. Obviously, to Ji Tianxing, this joke was nothing out of the ordinary. But to the crowd, it was an unimaginable and shocking heroic statement. What Tianbei region lord? What boundless heaven continent overlord? These were all levels that no one dared to come into contact with and simply did not dare to imagine. The entire Great Yin Empire was already vast enough for everyone. To be able to become the emperor of the Great Yin Empire was already a great figure. After a long time, everyone came back to their senses and gasped, exclaiming and lamenting, "Oh my God! You really dared to say that? Aren't you afraid of great heaven's punishment?" Xue Lin looked at him in amazement and could not help but pat him on the shoulder. Young Master is really the world's #1 madman. We can't even look up to you. Sir God Blood Illusion could not help applauding and praising. Left Emissary Jean and Right Emissary Blood Dragon even raised their thumbs, revealing expressions of deep admiration. When can we be like young Master and have the courage to say such bold words? Even if we die, we will have no regrets. Seeing that everyone was so emotional, Ji Tianqing sighed silently. Sigh. If you don't even have this bit of insight and courage, how far can you follow me in the future? Only Zhen Hong did not speak, although she was also so excited that her pretty face was flushed red and her blood was boiling from the shock. However, she looked at Ji Tianqing with a heart full of admiration and strong expectations in her heart. She said in a firm tone, I believe that with young Master's talent, you will be able to realize these bold words very soon. If I can follow young Master and see the scenery of Tianbei region and the boundless heaven continent, it will be the luckiest thing in my life. Hearing these words and seeing her look like a fanatical fan, Xuelin could not help but hold her forehead and sigh. Sigh. This girl is really hopelessly infatuated. Ji Tianqing raised his hand and motioned for everyone to be quiet. He said, All right, everyone's injuries have more or less recovered. Let's set off. Left Emissary Jean and Right Emissary Blood Dragon acknowledged the order and hurriedly left the hall to operate the divine ship. But Xuelin, Zhen Hong, Blood Illusion, and the rest were not in a hurry to leave. They all surrounded Ji Tianqing and asked what was going on with Tianbei region and the boundless heaven continent. Kid, you're not from the Great Yin Empire, right? Are you from Tianbei region? Young Master, can you tell us about the situation of Tianbei region and the boundless heaven continent? Young Master, to us, a divine king is the most unattainable powerhouse and important figure. But you don't seem to have much reaction to a divine king. Could it be that you have seen a divine king powerhouse? Chapter 3106. Lin Shui and Zhen Hong trio's words made Ji Tianqing somewhat at a loss whether to laugh or cry. However, thinking about it, he felt relieved. Zhen Hong and God Lord Blood Illusion's range of activity was limited to the periphery of the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom and had never left the Great Yin Empire. Lin Shui was considered experienced and knowledgeable, but she only came to the Great Yin Empire from the Celestial Fei Empire and did not understand Tianbei region's situation. Of course, Ji Tianqing did not understand Tianbei region and boundless heaven continent's situation either. But he had been investigating this matter all along and collecting relevant information. Regarding Tianbei region and boundless heaven continent's setup, he still had some basic understanding. Since he had nothing to do, he explained to everyone. Tianbei region is located at the northernmost tip of the continent. Further north is the Sunset Sea region. That is the Sea Clan's territory. Tianbei region doesn't sound big, but in reality, it accommodates more than a dozen empires. Under the dozen empires, there are hundreds of divine kingdoms ruled, with trillions of divine spirit. According to my knowledge and memory, there are roughly only a scant few divine kings in a region. Normally, there are no more than 10. Furthermore, they are all low-rank divine kings. Middle-rank divine kings are abnormally rare. Lin Shui nodded to indicate that she understood and said, So, we live in Tianbei region. Among the hundreds of divine kingdoms, there are only a few divine kings. No wonder we have never seen a divine king before. The Great Yin Empire also hasn't appeared for 1,000 years. Hearing you say so, Tianbei region is indeed very vast, beyond our imagination. Ji Tianqing said with a slight smile, Tianbei region is very vast. But compared to the entire boundless heaven continent, it's nothing. After all, there are close to 100 regions on the entire continent. Each region's area and population are no less than Tianbei region. Looking at the entire boundless heaven continent, divine king powerhouses are also less than 1,000. I vaguely remember that 1,000 years ago, there seemed to be only 600 over divine kings. But now, there's no way to know how many divine kings there are. Among those few hundred divine kings, 70% are low-rank divine kings, 25% are middle-rank divine kings. As for high-rank divine kings, at most, it's also only 5%. Lin Shui and God Lord Blood Illusion both revealed a look of amazement, very shocked and emotional. Zhenhong was rather excited and agitated and could not resist asking, "Sir, how do you know so clearly? Could it be that you're a divine king's descendant? Or perhaps you come from a god king clan?" Ji Tianxing thought for a while and replied without changing his expression, "Neither. I just like million small." He said that he had studied many ancient books to find this information. Oh, Masahiro nodded to indicate that he understood. She still wanted to pursue a few more questions. Lin Shui hurriedly rushed to ask, "Tianxing, hearing what you said earlier, are there only divine king powerhouses on the boundless heaven continent? Then why was the overlord of the continent called the Azura God Emperor by the statues erected in the city squares? Was God Emperor a kind of honorable title, or was it an even more profound realm of the divine Tao? Is there an even stronger realm above divine king?" When the words Shura God Emperor were mentioned, Ji Tianxing's body stiffened, and an imperceptible cold light flashed in his eyes. However, he remained calm and collected as he shook his head and said, "This question of yours has stumped me. This is also the secret that I have been pursuing and investigating all this time." Lin Shui frowned and thought for a while. She vaguely understood something. Zhenhong asked again, full of doubts, "Sir, I have also thought before, what kind of world are we living in? Is there only the boundless heaven continent in this world? What is outside the continent? The mysterious and vast heavenly sea?" Ji Tianxing looked at her with a smile and said in a serious tone, "The questions that you have raised are also secrets that I am eager to know. By the way, did you often daydream in the past? Would you let your imagination run wild and fantasize about many illusory things?" Zhenhong was stunned for a moment and nodded somewhat awkwardly. Lin Shui hurriedly teased, "This little girl indeed likes to daydream. However, what she is thinking about is not illusory, but the person in front of her." Zhenhong's thoughts were exposed in public. Immediately, her pretty face turned red from neck to neck. She was so embarrassed that she could not control herself. Sir God Blood Illusion's expression did not change. He pretended that he did not understand anything and obediently played the part of the wooden background. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said to Lin Shui with a serious expression, "When we cultivate the divine path, it is the process of understanding heaven and earth, the universe and the rules of Great Tao. The most precious quality is to meditate calmly and allow one's thoughts to wander. Think about the origin of heaven and earth, the origin of the universe and the rules of Great Tao. Only gods who constantly think and explore diligently can aspire to the peak of the divine path. Therefore, don't tease Zhenhong. Perhaps in the future, her divine path will far surpass yours." Lin Shui was lectured by him. She frowned in annoyance. However, Ji Tianxing's words were profound and very reasonable. She could not refute him. Zhenhong and Sir God Blood Illusion were deep in thought. They nodded in admiration to express their agreement. Lin Shui was not convinced, but she could not do anything to Ji Tianxing. She could only change the topic. "Kid, why did you go to the Great Yin Empire to die for no reason? Was it because of this matter?" "What matter?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked despite knowing the answer. Lin Shui frowned and said, "What did you say just now? What is the place beyond the boundless heaven continent? What is the realm above the divine king? Did you go to the Great Yin Empire to investigate these secrets?" Ji Tianxing nodded without hesitation and said, "That's right." Lin Shui was shocked and looked at him in disbelief. She exclaimed, Are you crazy? You went to the Great Yin Empire to die just to investigate these illusory things that have nothing to do with us?" Sir God Blood Illusion was also shocked. His eyes and expression were complicated. He respected Ji Tianqing and was willing to believe and follow him. However, he still could not understand Ji Tianqing's actions. Only Zhen Hong did not speak. His expression did not change much. It was as though in her heart, everything Ji Tianqing did was right. There was no need to ask for the reason. Ji Tianqing looked at Lin Shui and said seriously, "I'm not crazy. I'm more clear-headed than anyone else. First of all, the things I want to investigate are not illusory. These information and secrets are important to me. You might not understand, but I have my own secrets. Forgive me for not being able to tell you now. Secondly, I've only offended Prince Lian. I'm not trying to assassinate Great Yan's emperor. How is that suicide? Moreover, even if I really wanted to assassinate Great Yan's emperor, it's a sure thing. How is that suicide? Lin Shui, Sect Master Lin, this is my decision. I can't change it. If you think it's dangerous and don't want to die with me, I'll leave now. We'll go our separate ways. Don't worry, I won't force anyone to take the risk with me." Sir God Blood Illusion saw Ji Tianqing's serious expression and tone. He hastily tried to smooth things over and explained, "Young master, please calm down. Sect master didn't mean that. You've misunderstood her. If you want to talk about sword piercing the 9 heavens with more like-minded people, follow excellent reading literature on WeChat. Talk about life, find confidant." Chapter 3107. Ji Tianqing ignored Godlord Blood Illusion's explanation and turned to leave. After a short while, he entered the secret chamber and meditated. Zhen Hong was a little worried and quickly went to comfort him. Only Lin Shui and Godlord Blood Illusion were left in the hall. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Lin Shui stomped her feet in anger and frowned. "Humph! Damn brat! Why is he so arrogant and stubborn? What kind of person do you take me for? Do I look like someone who is afraid of death? I'm just worried about you. I'm afraid it'll be dangerous for you to go to the Great Fire Empire. You're taking my good intentions for granted." Lin Shui roared angrily. Godlord Blood Illusion quickly comforted her and asked her not to be angry. Unfortunately, Lin Shui did not listen and ignored his comforting words. She turned and went into the secret chamber and did not come out. Godlord Blood Illusion stood alone in the hall and could only smile bitterly. He had nothing to do, so he went to the control room of the Divine Vessel to chat with Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon Right Emissary. Unexpectedly, the two of them were not focused on piloting the Divine Vessel and were even gossiping about what was going on. Godlord Blood Illusion then understood that the two of them had also heard the argument in the hall, but they could not hear it clearly. Seeing that the two of them were very interested and kept asking questions, Godlord Blood Illusion reprimanded them angrily. "Focus on piloting the Divine Vessel. Why are you meddling in other people's business? Young Master Tianqing and our sect master are just bickering. Don't get involved blindly. If you really anger the two of you, who can bear it?" Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon Right Emissary shrank their necks and kept quiet. The southern part of the God-burying mountain range was close to the border of the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom. Normally, there would be a large army stationed at the border of a divine kingdom or soldiers patrolling. However, this area was deserted. That was because the God-burying mountain range was between two divine kingdoms and was the best natural barrier. Ordinary people could not cross the God-burying mountain range and enter the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom. If someone really crossed the mountain range and entered the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom, they were experts that ordinary soldiers could not afford to offend. It would be useless to station or patrol. The Raging Flames Divine Kingdom had always done that and did not send a large army to guard the border. In the past 10,000 years, there had indeed not been any accident. But today, from the moment the sun rose, a large number of gods appeared at the southern edge of the God-burying mountain range. At least 3,000 experts of the god race, dressed in two completely different uniforms, had arrived at the border. These experts were arrayed along the border, with one person stationed every 100 li, hiding in the forest or grassland. A total of over 3,000 people actually formed a defensive line that was over 300,000 miles long. The Protoss in fiery red armor and long robes were distributed in the eastern part of the defense line. As for the Protoss in ice blue armor or blue robes, they were hiding in the western part of the defensive line. Almost every expert had a special symbol embroidered on their sleeves and lapels, representing the forces they belonged to. More than 3,000 experts came from two major forces. One had the dark red symbol of rising flames, and the other had the azure symbol of surging waves. If there were any experts from the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom present, they would be able to recognize that these 3,000 experts were from the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Waves Palace. All of them were well trained, displaying a firm will and rich experience in concealment. Within a short 2 hours, more than 3,000 experts had all hidden themselves. No matter if they were hiding underground, in the forest, or on the grassland, no one could see through them. At a glance, the border was as calm as ever. To the north was the majestic God-bearing mountain range and dark green forests, and to the south was the vast grassland and land. At this moment, in a dark green forest on the western defensive line, a middle-aged God clan member dressed in purple robes was hiding in a towering ancient tree. He was meditating with his eyes closed. The tree hole inside the ancient tree was very wide, enough to accommodate 10 people. 4 middle-aged divine lords in fiery red armor were standing in a row, respectfully standing in a row. Sect Master, our sect's disciples are all in position. The concealment is complete. Someone cupped his hands and reported the situation. The middle-aged divine lord called Sect Master was the current sect master of the Sacred Fire Sect, Xing Wuyin. His eyes were still closed, and he said expressionlessly, "Good, hold the defensive line. Once the target appears, do not act rashly. Immediately report back." "Yes, Sect Master." The middle-aged divine lord who reported the news replied. Another middle-aged divine lord asked in confusion, "Sect Master, we are following the young prince's orders to hide here and wait for Tianxing to appear. Are we really not going to do anything?" Xing Wuyin said calmly, "We only need to follow the young prince's orders." The middle-aged divine lord with a mustache frowned and advised in a low voice, "Sect Master, we naturally have to follow the young prince's orders. But we can't be so inflexible and only know how to follow orders. If we don't know how to be flexible, we will always be a second-rate sect. Look at the Surging Wave Palace. They used to be a second-rate sect like us. But they are good at reading the young prince's mind, so they always exceed the quota and won the young prince's appreciation. Over the past decade, the Surging Wave Palace has received many benefits and been promoted by the young prince. As a result, the Surging Wave Palace has now become a first-rate sect and one of the 7 major sections. The Surging Wave Palace was ranked last among the 7 major sects of the Raging Flame Divine Country. But it was still a first-rate sect and had a higher status. The Sacred Fire Sect was different. They were the best among the second-rate sects and their power and status were second only to the Surging Wave Palace. But the Sacred Fire Sect was still a second-rate sect and had been left in the dust by the Surging Wave Palace. Over the past few years, the people of the Surging Wave Palace had been very arrogant. Even when they met the disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect, they would still be arrogant and haughty. Xing Wuyin opened his eyes and glanced at the 4 divine lords. He asked, "Is that what all of you think?" The 4 middle-aged divine lords nodded in unison, feeling indignant at the injustice. "Sect Master, you can't keep a low profile anymore. You have to do something big and make a great contribution. Over the past decade, the Surging Wave Palace's status has risen and they are riding on our heads. Our disciples have a lot of complaints. In the past, we were on equal footing with the Surging Wave Palace. But now we are being bullied. Who can be convinced? Sect Master, I heard that the young prince hates Tianqing to the core and sees him as his mortal enemy. If we can kill Tianqing, it will be a great contribution. We will definitely surpass the Surging Wave Palace in one fell swoop." Xing Wuyin frowned and said in a deep voice, "Even Long Fun was killed by that brat. What qualifications do we have to deal with him?" The middle-aged divine lord with a handlebar mustache hurriedly explained, "Sect Master, we are not fighting him head-on. We are just taking advantage of him. Everyone knows that that brat fought with the Bloody Flame Divine Country's Heavenly Union sect before. Although he won and even killed Long Fun and over a dozen divine lords, he is not a god king. However, he was not a divine king powerhouse. If he killed 1,000 enemies, he would definitely suffer 800 casualties, and he would also be heavily injured. We have the advantage in numbers. As long as we can surround him, we will definitely be able to kill him. Taking a step back, even if we can't kill him, being able to capture him and send him to the young prince is also a great contribution." Chapter 3108. After listening to the four Sir God's advice, Xing Wuyin frowned and pondered for a long time. He had seen the changes in the status of the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Waves Palace all these years. He was also jealous of the Surging Waves Palace's trickery and despised the palace master's glib words in front of the young prince. However, it was an indisputable fact that the Surging Waves Palace was stronger and stronger than the Sacred Fire Sect in all aspects. He had thought countless times about how to please the young prince and get more resources and benefits for the Sacred Fire Sect. Unfortunately, the situation in the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom was very peaceful, and he had never found an opportunity. Now the opportunity had finally come. There was a monster called Tianqing in the neighboring country. Not only did he kill all the experts of the Heavenly Sect, but he also made the young prince suffer a great loss and became the young prince's mortal enemy. Xing Wuyin also knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As long as he could kill Tianqing or trap him, it would be a great merit. After solving the young prince's problem, the Sacred Fire Sect would soar and surpass the Surging Waves Palace would only be a matter of time. He almost wanted to nod and agree to this at the first moment. However, he had always been cautious. Even if the benefits were at stake, he had to consider the consequences. Tianqing could make the young prince suffer a great loss and kill all the experts of the Heavenly Sect. One could imagine how powerful he was. An expert of this level was still very scary even if he was seriously injured. He was afraid that the experts of the Sacred Fire Sect would not only fail to capture Tianqing but also suffer heavy casualties. In that case, the Sacred Fire Sect would be finished. The four Sir Gods saw that Xing Wuyin was silent and were secretly anxious. They could not help but persuade him again. "Sect Master, we know you have concerns and are worried about everyone's safety. However, as the saying goes, wealth comes from danger. If you don't take the risk, how can you ask for wealth?" "That's right. We have been idle all these years. We have skills but nowhere to use them. Now that we finally have an opportunity, if we don't take it, we will regret it for the rest of our lives. The people of the Surging Waves Palace can think of what we can think of. Sect Master, hurry up and make a decision. If the Surging Waves Palace snatches away our only chance to make a contribution, our Sacred Fire Sect will never be able to stand out." "Sect Leader, this is not only the wish of us four elders, but also the wish of many disciples." The four elders tried to persuade him one after another. It was indeed a bit noisy. Xing Wuyin was a little upset. He was still hesitating at first, but he immediately made up his mind. "Shut up!" he coldly shouted with a dignified tone. The four elders immediately fell silent and looked at him nervously. Xing Wuyin raised his head and looked at the four people with a dignified expression. He said in a low voice, "Pass down the order, tell everyone to be on guard. Once you find traces of that brat, immediately send out a signal to surround and intercept him. As long as you succeed in stopping that brat, I will reward you according to your merits. If you can capture that brat alive, I will reward you handsomely." Hearing these words, the 4 elders were all overjoyed, and they all revealed smiles on their faces. Sect leader is wise. This subordinate obeys. I'll pass on the order right away. Sect master, there's hope for the rise of our sacred fire sect. 3 of them were overjoyed and hurriedly turned to pass on the message. Only the middle-aged Sir God with the handlebar mustache pondered for a moment before saying, "Everyone, wait." He stopped the 3 elders who were about to leave and said to Xing Wuyin, "Sect leader, since you have decided to seize this opportunity, we can't just wait for him to come. We should take the initiative to attack and explore the inner parts of the God-burying mountain range to find traces of that brat. Only then can we seize the initiative. Otherwise, when we find that brat, the people from the Palace of Surging Waves will also interfere. What should we do then? If we really want to snatch the credit, I'm afraid we can't win against the Palace of Surging Waves." Hearing his words, the 3 elders were stunned for a moment before they turned to look at Xing Wuyin. Obviously, they also felt that it made sense and hoped that Xing Wuyin would make a decision. Xing Wuyin frowned. He thought to himself that since he had to give it his all, he might as well give it his all. "All right, then pass down the order. Each deacon will lead 50 disciples and form a team. A total of 30 teams will advance towards the God-burying mountain range at the same time. Each team will be separated by 500 miles. If there is any situation, we can look after each other." Xing Wuyin adjusted the deployment and the 4 elders hurriedly passed down the order. In a short while, more than 1,500 Sacred Fire Sect disciples were divided into 30 teams and quietly entered the God-burying mountain range. Everyone was excited and vigilant as they searched the surroundings, ready to charge at any time. As for Xing Wuyin and the 4 elders, they flew through the sky in stealth mode and monitored the movements within a radius of 20,000 miles. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. The people of the Sacred Fire Sect had left the border and entered the God-burying mountain range for more than 10,000 miles. At the same time, at the border of the God-burying mountain range, the disciples of the Palace of Surging Waves were still hiding in the forest, grassland, and underground. In a certain cave, a dark divine light was shining. A middle-aged woman with a thin face and dark blue skin, wearing an ice-blue dress, was sitting on an ice lotus platform with her eyes closed. 7 middle-aged god race people wearing ice-blue armor were standing in the cave, their gazes focused on the middle-aged woman. Someone bowed and respectfully reported, "Palace Lord, things are as you expected. The people of the Sacred Fire Sect did not guard the border and have entered the God-burying mountain range." Another burly man said in a loud voice, "Palace Lord, the Sacred Fire Sect has been suppressed by us all these years. They have been looking for a chance to gain merit and gain the favor of the young prince. This is indeed the best opportunity to intercept Tianxing from the neighboring country. Is our sect really going to wait and see the Sacred Fire Sect steal the credit?" A handsome youth with a cold face and a cold temperament also advised, "Palace Lord, we have surpassed the Sacred Fire Sect in all aspects. We cannot fall behind them in this matter, and cannot give them a chance to turn the tables. I am willing to lead 300 disciples into the God-burying mountain range and actively search for Tianxing's whereabouts." The other elders also echoed and asked for the sect master's permission. "Palace Lord, I am also willing to lead the elite disciples to search for Tianxing's whereabouts." "Palace Lord, I am also willing to go." Hearing the elders' words, the Palace Lord of Surging Waves still had her eyes closed and appeared unusually calm. After the noisy crowd gradually quieted down, she said slowly, "The more anxious we are, the easier it is to make mistakes. We have already become one of the 7 major sects and are above the Sacred Fire Sect. Why should we compete with them? Wouldn't that lower our status? Moreover, if that monstrous youth called Tianxing was so easy to deal with, how could he become the young prince's nemesis?" Hearing those words, the 7 elders all grew silent. The palace lord of surging waves continued, "The sacred fire sect is in such a hurry. Let them be the vanguard first." Chapter 3109. The night was so dark that one couldn't even see their fingers. There was no starlight in the sky either. The pitch-black divine ship was like a black shadow cutting through the night sky as it sped through the god-burying mountain range. Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon Right Emissary were focused on operating the divine ship. Looking at the dark sky ahead, Left Emissary Jean couldn't help but sigh. "We'll be out of the god-burying mountain range and enter the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom 50,000 miles south. I've never left the Bloody Flames Divine Kingdom in my life, so I don't know what the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom looks like. What's the difference between it and our Bloody Flames Divine Kingdom?" Blood Dragon Right Emissary chuckled. "They're all divine kingdoms under the rule of the Great Yin Empire. What's the difference? It's just a little more prosperous with more people and powerhouses." "That's true." Left Emissary Jean nodded and said with some emotion, "I've been traveling in the god-burying mountain range for the past few days, and I've seen what a forbidden area is. We're attacked by divine beasts several times a day, and they're all at the Divine Lord realm. They move in groups. Fortunately, we're on a divine ship and there are many powerhouses traveling with us. If we pass through this mountain range alone, we'll die 9 times out of 10. Blood Dragon Right Emissary smiled again and nodded. "So, without the protection of powerhouses, even a divine lord can't move an inch. It's impossible to travel all over the Great Yin Empire. Only powerhouses like the Sect Master and Young Master Tianqing can leave the Great Yin Empire and travel all over the Northern Heaven region." The two were chatting and sighing in their hearts. At this moment, Left Emissary Jean suddenly frowned and said in a low voice, "Slow down. There seems to be a lot of divine beasts moving about 2,500 miles ahead." Blood Dragon Right Emissary was also vigilant. After releasing his divine sense to investigate, he said with a solemn expression, "Yes, I've detected 9 groups of divine beasts, close to 300 people. They seem to be searching for something?" Left Emissary Jean said without hesitation, "Slow down and stay hidden. I'll inform the Sect Master and Young Master Tianqing." Blood Dragon Right Emissary frowned and chuckled. "Don't be nervous. I've already investigated. Those people aren't much of a threat. 80% of them are divine lords, and only a dozen or so divine lords, and they're all low-rank divine lords. Even if they want to harm us, they can't even break through the defenses of the divine warship. They're not even as good as those blood-winged divine birds we encountered before." Left Emissary Jean nodded slightly. "All right, then let's not inform Sect Leader and Young Master Tianqing first. This place is close to the border of the Raging Flame Divine Country. We have to be vigilant." After the two of them came to an agreement, they cautiously piloted the divine warship and flew through the night sky. The distance between the two sides was constantly shrinking. 4,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers. Finally, when the distance between the two sides was only 1,000 kilometers, the 9 groups of gods seemed to have discovered the invisible divine warship, and they all gathered around it. They activated their powerful divine powers and unleashed their divine abilities and secret arts that blotted out the sun. Hundreds of divine powers and secret arts formed a sky full of blade auras and sword shadows. All kinds of divine beasts, meteors and light blades fell towards the divine battleship. The Left Emissary Jean and the Blood Dragon Right Emissary were not worried. Instead, they felt inexplicably excited and expectant. Their blood was boiling. "Hee, a bunch of reckless fools. It's my loss if you can break through the defenses of the divine warship. Come on." The two had already fought together many times, and their actions were very coordinated. The Left Emissary Jean activated the divine cannons of the divine warship and bombarded the 9 groups of gods. The Blood Dragon Right emissary activated the defensive array of the divine warship and condensed a blood-colored light shield on the surface of the divine warship. In the next moment, a series of loud bangs could be heard. The sky was full of blade auras, sword shadows, and the radiance of divine spells ruthlessly bombarded the divine warship, bursting out fragments of divine light that blotted out the sky. The blood-colored light shield on the surface of the divine warship blocked all the attacks, and there was not even a crack on it. Then, sinister divine cannons extended from both sides and the bow of the divine warship, releasing destructive beams of light that bombarded the 9 groups of gods. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst the deafening explosions, more than 200 beams of light tore through the night sky and bombarded the gods. Half of the beams of light missed and blasted into the surrounding mountains and rivers. The mountains were blasted into ruins, and deep pits and ravines were blasted into the ground. Dust flew up and covered the sky. But the other half of the beams of light landed in the midst of the 9 groups of gods. Instantly, the gods dressed in fiery red robes and armor were thrown off their feet by the beams of light, their flesh and blood splattering everywhere. All sorts of shrill screams, painful roars, and angry curses exploded in the night sky. Without a doubt, the 9 groups of gods dressed in red were the disciples of the sacred fire sect. Most of the disciples were only at the 7th to 9th level of the celestial god realm. Only the deacons leading them had the strength of a divine lord. After this round of bombardment, more than 60 of the nearly 300 sacred fire sect disciples were killed on the spot, and more than 30 were seriously injured. Even with such heavy casualties, they were still unable to intimidate them. Instead, it aroused the ferocity of the sacred fire sect disciples, making them even braver as they charged toward the divine warship without any regard for their own safety. Kill! It's that divine warship. Stop it! Tianxing must be in that divine warship. As long as we stop him, the sect master will reward us handsomely. Everyone, don't worry. I've already sent out the signal. The other teams are coming to help immediately. The sect master and a few elders are holding the line at the back. We must not embarrass the sacred fire sect. The deacons in fiery red armor shouted at the top of their lungs to boost the morale of the disciples. They led the disciples in a charge, using their ultimate killing moves with all their might. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Divine spell light covered the sky and poured down like a flood, drowning Lin Shui's warship. The divine warship circled in the night sky, constantly adjusting its angle. The divine cannons shot out beams of divine power at the sacred fire sect disciples. Bam! 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 Countless divine spell light blasted the divine warship, creating deafening explosions. The divine warship trembled from the bombardment, and the blood-red light shield rippled and cracked. However, the blood dragon of the right kept controlling the array to repair the light shield's cracks and replenish its divine power. On the other side, another half of the hundreds of beams of light from the divine cannons hit the sacred fire sect disciples. Along with a series of muffled rumbling noises, dazzling divine light blossomed from the crowd once again, and a rain of blood and corpses splashed all over the sky. In the blink of an eye, dozens of sacred fire sect disciples were blasted into nothingness by the divine cannons. The two sides went back and forth, exchanging 5 rounds in 10 breath. When the sacred fire sect disciples rushed to the divine warship, 80% of them were dead or injured. Only about 50 people were still alive. The divine warship was unscathed. However, the blood-red light shield was full of cracks, and its power had weakened. But, before the blood dragon of the right could repair the light shield, Xing Wuyin and the 4 sacred fire sect elders had rushed to the divine warship and attacked. In the night sky, more than a dozen teams had received the signal and were rushing over at lightning speed. A moment later, the divine warship was surrounded by the sacred fire sect. Chapter 31:10 Heavenly Wind Dragon Saber 9 Revolution Starfall Red flame, sacred fire badge. Xing Wuyin and the four elders attacked the divine warship 100 miles away with their ultimate technique. The 100-mile-long saber light, the earth-shattering saber light, and the mountain-sized Abijna light illuminated an area of a few hundred miles. A peerlessly terrifying wave of divine power, carrying with it the power to destroy everything, viciously struck the divine warship that was circling in the air. Bam! 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 Kacha! Kacha! First, there was a dull explosion. The divine warship was drowned by the five-colored divine light. It swayed left and right on the verge of collapse. Then, the blood-red light shield protecting the divine warship was blasted into pieces. The blood-colored light shards fell from the sky. The divine warship was also sent flying, crashing into the ruins 100 miles away. At this critical moment, Left Emissary Jean could no longer use the divine cannon to attack the Sacred Fire Sect disciples. He quickly helped the Blood Dragon Emissary of the Right to control the array to stabilize the divine warship. Just before it fell into the ruins, the divine warship finally stabilized and stopped in the night sky. Left Emissary Jean and the Blood Dragon Emissary of the Right heaved a sigh of relief. Phew! At least it didn't fall to the ground. A few upper-level divine lords attacked. Otherwise, it wouldn't be like this. Damn it! That group of people came prepared and specifically came to kill us. We can't deal with them. We can only inform the sect leader and young Master Tianqing. In an instant, the two communicated with their divine wills and decided to ask Lin Shui and Ji Tianqing to help. But just as Left Emissary Jean was about to wake them up, he found that Ji Tianqing had already left the divine warship and appeared in the night sky. When the divine warship was attacked and Xing Wuyin and the four elders appeared, Ji Tianqing had already sensed them. Swoosh! He left the divine warship in a flash and stood proudly in the night sky. He looked to the south and saw Xing Wuyin and four elders in fiery red armor in the night sky 100 miles away. He looked at them expressionlessly and stared at the insignia on their robes for a moment. "Who are you?" His face was dignified as he asked in a low voice. While he was sizing up the other party, Xing Wuyin and the others were also sizing him up. The middle-aged elder with a mustache even took out a portrait and compared it with Ji Tianqing. After taking a closer look, the bearded elder nodded to Xing Wuyin and transmitted his voice. "Sect Master, we made the right bet. It's him." The mustached elder's tone was filled with unconcealable surprise and excitement. Xing Wuyin slightly nodded, his sharp eyes fixed on Ji Tianqing as he sneered, "You're indeed worthy of being the #1 genius of the Bloodfire Divine Country. You're really in high spirits. Tianqing, I've been waiting for you for a long time." Ji Tianqing frowned slightly as a cold light flashed in his eyes. "You're Prince Lian's lackeys? Are you here on orders to kill me?" Xing Wuyin did not get angry. Instead, he sneered and said, "Hee. You're not that stupid after all. That's right, I'm the sect master of the Sacred Fire Sect. I've mobilized the entire sect to kill you. It can't be helped. Who asked you to be so blind as to offend the young prince?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said contemptuously, "Sacred Fire Sect? I've only heard of the top forces like the Surging Waves Palace, the Seven Stars Sect, and the Dual Blades Sect. What Sacred Fire Sect? It must be a small, insignificant force." Ji Tianqing said it casually, but he did not know that his words had dealt a critical blow to Xing Wuyin and the rest. Especially the four elders. They were so ashamed and angry that they were trembling and almost vomiting blood. Bullsh *T. What kind of top force is the Surging Waves Palace? Our Sacred Fire Sect is as famous as the Surging Waves Palace. If you haven't heard of it, it can only mean that you're ignorant. Brat, it's useless for you to have a sharp tongue. I'm going to tear you into pieces." The four elders were furious, and they cursed with murderous intent. Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a playful smile as he vaguely understood something. He looked around and saw more than 50 sacred fire sect disciples in a sorry state. Further away in the night sky, there were more than a dozen teams rushing over from all directions. Finally, his gaze fell on Xing Wuyin and the rest. He sneered contemptuously. Since you're Prince Lian's lackeys, you should know what happened to the Heavenly Union sect. To be honest, you little cats and dogs dare to come and kill me? I really admire your courage. Seeing that you're young and ignorant, I'll give you one chance. Back down obediently now, and I can spare your lives. These words were undoubtedly a great insult to Xing Wuyin and the rest. The 4 elders were even more ashamed and resentful. Murderous intent surged from their bodies, and their eyes were dyed with a layer of blood. Xing Wuyin sneered even more mockingly. Ha ha! Brat, stop bluffing. You're so tough on the outside but weak on the inside. Do you still want to hide from my fiery eyes of truth? You've been seriously injured in the battle with the Heavenly Union sect. You're just an empty shell now. You can't even withstand a single blow. The 4 elders also sneered and reprimanded and humiliated him. Brat, you want to spare our lives, but we don't want to spare yours. Cut the crap. Kneel down and accept your death. Tianxing, I really want to thank you for being the stepping stone for our sect's rise. Little bastard, how do you want to die? Their voices echoed in the night sky, spreading for hundreds of miles. The 50 or so sacred fire sect disciples were also in high spirits and confidence. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. Sigh, no wonder the Surging Waves Palace is one of the 7 major sects, and the sacred fire sect is unknown. Hearing this, the 4 elders were stunned. The bearded elder's face was gloomy, and he asked in a cold voice, Brat, what do you mean? Ji Tianxing couldn't help but roll his eyes. With your intelligence and ability, you want to revive the sacred fire sect? What a fool's dream! Xing Wuyin and the 4 elders were enraged. They couldn't hold back their murderous intent anymore and attacked in anger. Brat, you're courting death. I'm going to kill you. If I don't cut you into pieces, how can I vent my anger? As they roared, Xing Wuyin and the 4 elders used all their strength and used their ultimate killing move. Heaven Lamenting Sacred Fire Blade. Xing Wuyin roared and released endless sacred fire, forming a giant blade that was 100 miles long and slashing at Ji Tianxing. The moment the sacred fire blade appeared, the night sky was lit up, and the air was burned to nothing. The 4 elders also used their trump cards, releasing destructive divine art light shadows. Ji Tianxing remained calm in the face of the siege of 5 high-level divine lords. He unhurriedly drew his heaven's burial sword and waved it to counterattack. Daylight Sword. Dragon Elephant Divine Fist. He punched out with his left fist, creating a mountain-sized dragon elephant phantom that smashed at the 4 elders. He waved the burial of heaven with his right hand, creating a blazing golden halo that was like the sun in the sky. At the same time, Lin Shui and Blood Illusion appeared in the night sky, helping Ji Tianxing to counterattack Xing Wuyin and the others. Sword Piercing the 9 Heavens. Chapter 31:11. Kaboom! The dark golden sun with a radius of 100 miles collided with the Heaven Sorrow Sacred Fire Saber, creating a thunderous sound. This was a head-on confrontation between Ji Tianxing and Xing Wuyin, a head-on collision with all their might. The people of Sacred Fire Sect all thought that Xing Wuyin would definitely gain the upper hand. Even if he couldn't kill Ji Tianxing, he could at least severely injure him and force him to retreat. After all, Xing Wuyin was an 8th-level Divine Lord expert and his strength was very strong. And Ji Tianxing was so young and his strength was unknown. Moreover, he had just fought a great battle with Heavenly Sect and must be seriously injured. What reason did Xing Wuyin have to lose? However, the final result left everyone dumbfounded. They revealed an incomparably shocked expression. The Golden Sun and Heaven Sorrow Sacred Fire Saber collapsed at the same time, bursting out golden light and sacred fire that blotted out the sky. However, that incomparably powerful strength qi sent Xing Wuyin flying hundreds of kilometers away, crashing into the ruins of a collapsed mountain. Not only did he end up with a dusty face, but when he crawled out of the ruins, there was a lot of blood flowing out of his mouth and nose. Obviously, he was at a disadvantage in the clash and his internal organs were injured. The disciples of Sacred Fire sect were shocked to see this scene and their confidence was severely damaged. Everyone couldn't help but have the same thought in their minds. Didn't they say that Tianxing was seriously injured? Why doesn't he look injured at all? Sect Master is so strong but he can't beat Tianxing? Can we really kill him? Originally, the disciples of Sacred Fire sect were full of confidence and confidence. Now that their confidence was severely damaged and their aura weakened rapidly, their combat power was of course greatly reduced. Especially the four elders, they were the most affected. Ji Tianxing's strong strength and domineering aura cast a shadow over their hearts. Lin Shui and Sir God Blood Illusion attacked fiercely and the four of them were forced to retreat without any strength to fight back. The two sides had only exchanged a few moves, but two elders had already been injured by the blood blade. One of their arms and one of their legs were cut off, and their blood scattered into the night sky. When the other two elders saw this scene, they were terrified. When they made their moves, they were hesitant and did not dare to fight with their lives on the line. Of course, their battle prowess was greatly reduced. As such, Shui Lin and Sir God Blood Illusion became even more ferocious, beating the four elders until they fled in a sorry state. Fortunately, more than 10 teams of Sacred Fire sect disciples arrived in time. More than 500 disciples, led by 18 deacons, surrounded Ji Tianxing, Shui Lin, Sir God Blood Illusion, and the divine ship. They launched an aggressive siege. The battlefield had shrunk to a radius of about 100 miles. The divine battleships could not be fully deployed, and it was easy for them to accidentally injure their own people. Therefore, Shui Lin put away the godly battleship. Zhen Hong, the left emissary Jin, and the Blood Dragon right emissary rushed out and attacked the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect with murderous intent. Not only that, Ji Tianxing also opened the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and released 2 divine beasts. Roar! An earth-shattering dragon roar tore through the night sky. The black dragon appeared with a torrent of black water. It pounced into the crowd ferociously and started a massacre. Swish, 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 swish. The moment Qian Yu appeared, its mountain-sized body released thousands of icicles that shot in all directions. Before this, Qian Yu and the Black Dragon had been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. Not long ago, they had broken through to the Sir God realm almost at the same time, and their powers had increased by several times. Now that their divine path foundations were stable, they could not hold back and were eager to find an opportunity to test their skills. Therefore, the moment they appeared, they gave it their all and stirred up a storm in the night sky. One sword light chills 19 states. At this moment, a clear roar was heard, and a ball of blazing white light appeared. Dressed in white, Bai Long's silver hair fluttered in the wind. He held the Source Stone Divine Sword in his right hand and stood in the night sky. Under the night sky, divine light shone on him, giving him an extraordinary temperament, as though he was a peerless sword master. But in the next moment, his extraordinary temperament was destroyed. More than 100 disciples of the Sacred Fire sect joined forces and unleashed their Abhijna light shadows that blotted out the sky. He was instantly filled with anger and cursed, "You little trash who don't know what's good for you. Watch how I deal with you." Bai Long used his teleportation divine ability and moved 10 miles away, narrowly avoiding the divine light shadows that filled the sky. Then, he let out a dragon roar that could pierce through metal and stone. He transformed into a 1,000-foot-long lightning dragon and pounced into the crowd. Bam! 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 The lightning flashing Bai Long wreaked havoc in the crowd, creating a terrifying hurricane that swept up countless broken limbs and corpses. A series of muffled sounds exploded, reverberating in the night sky. Just the two divine beasts and by long had caused chaos and violence within a 300-mile radius. The heavenly god realm's sacred fire sect disciples were extremely weak and could not withstand a single blow. Like wheat being reaped, they fell one after another and were smashed into pieces. Countless pieces of flesh and blood were thrown out. In addition to the fierce attacks of Zhen Hong, Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon Right Emissary, the 500 Sacred Fire Sect disciples found it even harder to resist and soon suffered heavy casualties. On the other side, Ji Tianqing and Xing Wuyin had exchanged more than a dozen blows, and the outcome had already been decided. Xing Wuyin's outcome was very tragic. Not only were his clothes tattered and his body covered in blood, but his hair was also messy and his face was dirty. His internal organs and meridians had suffered heavy injuries, and they had long since ruptured inch by inch. Even a dozen of his divine bones had been broken. He breathed heavily and blood kept coming out of his nose and mouth. His entire face was a mess of flesh and blood. His divine power was rapidly weakening and his combat power had also greatly decreased. At this time, Ji Tianxing's aura surged like a rainbow as he used his ultimate killer move, Galaxy River Break. Swish! Endless starlight formed a giant blade and slashed at Xing Wuyin with a power that could destroy everything. Before the blade of light arrived, Xing Wuyin's divine soul had already been locked and he felt a strong sense of danger. The surrounding space also seemed to have frozen, making it difficult for him to move. Under such circumstances, he had no chance to dodge at all and could only block with all his might. Sky melting Saint Fire! Xing Wuyin shouted angrily as endless Saint Fire burst out of his body and surrounded him, forming an indestructible fire shield. At the same time, he held the divine sword above his head with both hands and resisted the attack of the starlight blade. Kaboom! In the next moment, a thunderous boom exploded in the night sky. The starlight blade that was more than 10,000 feet long hit the Saint Fire shield. The Saint Fire shield that was more than 10,000 feet in radius was immediately smashed into pieces and sparks flew all over the sky. There was also a dark red divine saber mixed in with the fragments of the flames. Apparently, Xing Wuyin's divine sword had been knocked away and his shield had been shattered. He was immediately split in half from head to toe by the starlight blade. The two halves of the divine body fell into the night sky and spurted out divine blood all over the sky. Xing Wuyin's divine body was destroyed by Ji Tianqing just like that. Countless disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect revealed looks of shock and horror when they saw this scene. Their hearts instantly turned cold. Chapter 31:12. Xing Wuyin had always been the spiritual leader of the Sacred Fire Sect. Not only was he the founder of the Sacred Fire Sect, but he was also the strongest. All the disciples admired and revered him greatly. So, when he gave the order to search for and attack Ji Tianqing, the disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect immediately followed him. Many disciples gladly accepted the order and charged forward without any regard for their own safety. However, Xing Wuyin's performance was beyond everyone's expectations and disappointed the disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect. He had only exchanged a few moves with Ji Tianqing, but he had already been seriously injured and his divine body was destroyed. He was too weak, wasn't he? The difference in strength between him and Ji Tianqing was so big? Everyone found it hard to believe and they were shocked. The battlefield was silent for a moment and the disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect were stunned. When they came back to their senses, they roared in pain and anger, or exclaimed in disbelief. In an instant, the combat power of the disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect decreased sharply and their morale plummeted. They had already been slaughtered by Zhen Hong, Black Dragon, Qian Yu and the others, and they had suffered heavy casualties. After the heavy blow of Xing Wuyin's divine body being destroyed, the disciples were immediately defeated and ran away. Zhen Hong, Left Emissary Jean, White Dragon and the others took the opportunity to kill the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect. Shui Lin and Sir God Blood Illusion also became more ferocious, injuring the 4 elders severely. They covered their heads and fled like rats. As for Xing Wuyin, his fate was already sealed. After his divine body was destroyed, his godhead quickly went into the ground and tried to escape from the god-burying mountain range. The sky had been blocked by Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui and the others. He could not escape at all. Only by traveling through the ground could he survive. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing had been staring at him the entire time. How could he possibly let him escape? Break the 8 barons! Ji Tianxing shouted coldly. He formed a divine art with both hands and manipulated the law of earth to perform a divine skill. Crack! The ruins within a radius of 1,000 miles instantly split into a few wide gullies, dividing the ruins into 8 pieces. Xing Wuyin's escape route was cut off, blocked by 2 huge ravines. Before he could turn around and run away, the boundless power of the earth condensed into a giant palm with a radius of 100 miles and suddenly closed in. Shua! The dark yellow giant grasped his godhead and flew out from the ground. As the giant palm flew into the sky, it continued to shrink and condense. When it arrived in front of Ji Tianxing, the huge palm had already shrunk to a radius of 3,000 feet. At the same time, the dark yellow soil and stone had condensed to the limit, turning into a translucent golden color. That was the sign of the laws of the earth being condensed to the limit. A dark red godhead wreathed in blazing holy flames was struggling desperately in the giant palm. Without another word, Ji Tianxing controlled the giant palm to crush the godhead. Cracking sounds rang out as Xing Wuyin's godhead was crushed on the spot. An 8th stage realm upper divine monarch, a strong practitioner who had been famous for 10,000 years, had fallen just like that. Xing Wuyin didn't even have the chance to admit defeat and beg for mercy before he was killed by Ji Tianxing. Of course, Ji Tianxing had given him a chance to live previously, but he didn't cherish it. Now that he had fallen into Ji Tianxing's hands, Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time and killed him directly. Shwa shwa shwa! The golden giant palm dissipated, and the 9 pieces of godhead fragments flew to Ji Tianxing, who kept them in his interspatial ring. Not far away, the 4 elders and many Sacred Fire sect disciples witnessed this scene with their own eyes. Instantly, everyone revealed a horrified expression, and their eyes were filled with horror. Our sect master has fallen! Heavens! Our sect master has actually been killed. Damn you Tianxing, we'll fight it out with you! Avenge our sect master! Everyone, don't be rash. Preserving your strength is the most important thing. The night sky was filled with the cries and shouts of the Sacred Fire sect disciples. Everyone was filled with grief and indignation. Many disciples were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They subconsciously charged at Ji Tianxing, wanting to avenge Xing Wuyin. However, more people were filled with horror, and they didn't even have the courage to take action. They were trembling with fear, and the thought of retreating rose in their hearts. They couldn't help but turn around and flee. At that moment, there were more than a dozen teams that were further away, and they were rushing over to provide support. The situation was very chaotic. Many wardens and disciples couldn't make up their minds. Xing Wuyin was dead, and the only ones who were qualified to give orders were the 4 elders. However, among the 4 elders, 2 of them had already been killed by Lin Shui and Sir God Blood Illusion, and the godhead fragments were still scattered on the battlefield. The 2 elders who were lucky enough to survive were seriously injured, and they couldn't even take care of themselves. They tried their best to hold on, but they couldn't drag it on for long. Eventually, they couldn't escape death. Very soon, more than a dozen teams of Sacred Fire sect disciples arrived one after another, and they rushed into the battlefield with murderous intent. Zhen Hong, left emissary Jin, Bai Long and the rest were besieged by the Sacred Fire sect disciples, and an intense fight broke out. The Sacred Fire sect disciples, who were seriously injured and in a sorry state, were suddenly caught in a dilemma. They had witnessed their sect leader being killed with their own eyes, and they had witnessed Ji Tianxing's valiant power. They didn't want to stay a moment longer, and they only wanted to escape from the battlefield. However, hundreds of reinforcements had just arrived, and they were imposing. If they were to escape in a sorry state, what would happen to the hundreds of disciples? After hesitating and struggling for a while, a few wardens finally came up with a countermeasure. We have already fought a battle, and everyone is injured. We have used up a lot of our divine power. Since the reinforcements have arrived, let them fight first. Let's recuperate for a while. The warden's orders were approved by more than 100 disciples who were lucky enough to survive. Everyone retreated to the edge of the battlefield, and as they observed the situation on the battlefield, they circulated their powers to heal their wounds. These people were very cunning, and they all had the same idea. If the reinforcements were strong enough to defeat Ji Tianxing and the rest, then they would join the battle. If the reinforcements couldn't withstand a single blow, then they would act according to the situation and be prepared to escape at any time. After Ji Tianxing killed Xing Wuyin, he teleported to Lin Xue's side. He teamed up with Lin Xue and Sir God Blood Illusion to deal with the two elders who were lucky enough to survive. The two elders were already seriously injured, and their fighting power was weak. The moment he attacked, he decided the outcome of the battle with one punch. Both sides only exchanged 3 blows, and the two elders were killed on the spot. Not only were their bodies smashed to pieces, their godheads were also shattered into pieces. After dealing with the 4 elders, Ji Tianxing led Lin Xue and Sir God Blood Illusion to the last battlefield. This battlefield had the most people, and it had the most momentum and commotion. More than 700 Sacred Fire Sect disciples were attacking Zhenhong, Bai Long, left emissary Jin, and the rest with all their might. Black Dragon and Qian Yu also revealed their true forms that were 100 miles long, and they fought fiercely in the night sky. Originally, both sides were evenly matched, but as Ji Tianxing, Lin Xue and Sir God Blood Illusion joined the battle became a one-sided massacre. Especially Ji Tianxing and Lin Xue. They turned into 2 golden and blood-red hurricanes of death, and they swept across the battlefield wantonly. Everywhere they went, all obstacles were crushed. They were really invincible. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 31:13. 7 divine lords and 2 divine beasts were fighting against more than 700 Sacred Fire Sect disciples. The result of this battle, which had a huge disparity in numbers, was equally ridiculous. It was shocking. In less than 15 minutes, 80% of the 700 Sacred Fire Sect disciples had been killed. Only 100 disciples and a few deacons were left alive. However, they were all injured and covered in blood. They looked miserable. The Sacred Fire Sect disciples were leaderless and had fallen to such a state. Be it combat power or mental strength, they had completely collapsed. They could not be bothered to take revenge for their sect master. They all turned and fled towards the south. The injured Sacred Fire Sect disciples who had retreated to the edge of the battlefield to watch the battle had already turned and fled when they saw that the situation was not good. Hence, the Sacred Fire Sect disciples split into 2 groups and fled. Ji Tianxing and company also split up to chase after them. Ji Tianxing, Lin Xue and Divine Lord Blood Illusion chased after the first 100 people who fled. Zhenhong, left emissary Jin, Bai Long and company chased after the last 100 disciples. The 2 parties engaged in a chase in the God-burying mountain range. Divine light streaked across the night sky and dispersed the darkness. After a while, Ji Tianxing and company caught up with the Sacred Fire Sect disciples and released their divine powers. Bam! 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 Shadows of divine spells and saber lights and sword lights that covered the sky poured down like a flood. After the flood, the number of Sacred Fire Sect disciples was reduced by more than half. Then, the second wave of divine powers poured down. The dozens of Sacred Fire sect disciples, who were lucky enough to survive, also turned into ashes. They died without a complete corpse. In just a few seconds, the battle was over. Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui and Divine Lord Blood Illusion turned around to intercept the second group of Sacred Fire sect disciples. The outcome of these 100 disciples was even worse. Ji Tianxing and company intercepted them in front and Zhen Hong, Bai Long and company chased after them from behind. They were pincered and had no chance of escaping. In the face of certain death, the willpower of many disciples collapsed, and they all laid down their weapons and surrendered. Zhen Hong, left emissary Jin, Bai Long and company stopped their attacks and looked at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his decision. Ji Tianxing raised his hand and was about to give the order. Shui Lin held the 10-meter-long blood saber and waved it, covering the sky with blood-red light blades, killing all the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect. Swish! Swish! She performed 3 supreme saber techniques and released more than 2,000 blood blades, killing more than 100 Sacred Fire sect disciples. The battle came to an end. The divine light that filled the sky gradually extinguished, and the night sky quieted down. Shui Lin put away the blood blade and flew back to Ji Tianxing's side, her expression unchanged. Zhen Hong, left emissary Jin, White Dragon, and the others all looked at her strangely, as if they wanted to say something. You! Ji Tianxing also frowned, not knowing what to say. Shui Lin did not take it seriously. She glanced at the crowd calmly and said confidently, "Why are you looking at me? These people are all Prince Lian's lackeys. Shouldn't they be killed? If we are defeated and fall into their hands, do you think we can survive?" Everyone was silent and speechless. Zhen Hong hesitated for a moment and said without confidence, But they have already surrendered. So what? Shui Lin rolled her eyes and said angrily, "If anyone wants to kill you, they can live by surrendering after they fail. Then your enemies will be endless. What's more, we are on the run and are in danger. We don't need captives." Zhen Hong immediately quieted down and didn't say anything else. White Dragon nodded and said to Shui Lin seriously, "Sect Master Lin, what you said makes sense. We all agree. But we hope you won't make a decision on your own. After all, we are still following Master's will." Zhen Hong quickly nodded. Black Dragon and Qian Yu also echoed. Blood Illusion God, left emissary Jin, and Blood Dragon right emissary could only remain silent. Although they also thought so in their hearts. After all, they were Shui Lin's former subordinate. How could they change their minds so quickly? Shui Lin did not feel embarrassed. She patted Ji Tianxing's shoulder and said to White Dragon, "You think too much. I will not steal your master's limelight and position. It's just that it's not appropriate for your master to kill the surrendered soldiers. It will affect his glorious image. I am a demoness and a devil. I don't care about my reputation. I will be the bad guy for him." White Dragon was speechless. Ahem. Ji Tianxing pretended to cough twice to break the awkward silence. He said expressionlessly, "Okay, don't just stand there. Let's clean up the battlefield. This is just the beginning. There are more dangerous things to come." Hearing his words, everyone hurriedly scattered in all directions to clean up the battlefield within 1,000 miles. In the previous battle, they had almost destroyed the Sacred Fire sect. Not only did they kill the sect master, 4 elders and 30 deacons, but they also killed more than 1,400 disciples of the Sacred Fire sect. After everyone was killed, there would be Godhead fragments, space rings, and some divine weapons and equipment. Although each disciple did not accumulate much wealth, at most there would be hundreds of thousands of divine stones. At least, there would be tens of thousands of divine stones. But many a little makes a mickle. When the savings of more than 1,000 people were put together, it would be a shocking amount of wealth. Everyone split up and acted with high efficiency. In just 100 breaths' time, the battlefield was cleaned up. Everyone gathered together again. Ji Tianxing gained the most. Not only did he get the Godhead fragments of Xing Wuyin and the 4 elders, but he also got their space rings. He did a rough count. The wealth that Xing Wuyin and the four elders had accumulated was at least 5 billion divine stones. Among them, there was a large amount of superpower scrolls, divine elixirs and divine weapons and equipment. Xuelin, Sir God Blood Illusion, Zhen Hong and the rest collected a large amount of divine weapons and space rings. Everyone was too lazy to check the exact number. So, they let Ji Tianxing distribute. He only kept the godhead fragments of Xing Wuyin and the four elders, dozens of upper monarch-level divine weapons and hundreds of upper monarch-level elixirs. The remaining resources worth more than 4 billion were distributed to Xuelin, Zhen Hong, White Dragon and the rest. As for the more than 1,000 space rings and divine weapons, they were equally distributed to everyone. Even Qian Yu and Black Dragon had a share. The result was naturally to everyone's satisfaction. Everyone had fought a great battle and made a windfall. So, they felt that any risk was worth it. Even people like Xuelin, White Dragon and Qian Yu, who loved to fight, were looking forward to the next great battle. By then, they would make a windfall again. Just as everyone finished distributing the spoils and was having a heated discussion, 2 balls of dazzling divine light lit up the night sky in the south and came with boundless murderous intent. Swoosh! Swoosh! In a few breaths' time, the 2 balls of 5-colored divine light came close. After the divine light faded, the figures of 8 divine lord powerhouses appeared. The leader was a middle-aged woman in an ice-blue dress. Her skin was dark blue and shimmering. She was sitting on the ice lotus seat. The other 7 Sir Gods were in ice-blue armor, and the same emblem was embroidered on their chests. Chapter 31:14. The 7 monarch god experts were all holding their weapons, eyeing them covetously. The middle-aged woman in the lead looked coldly at Ji Tianxing and the rest. Her purplish-black eyes flashed with a frightening cold light. She was emitting a terrifying cold air, causing the temperature within 1,000 miles to drop and snow to fall. Although she was silent, an invisible murderous intent spread and covered 1,000 miles. Lin Shui, Bai Long and the rest were silent. Everyone kept their spoils of war and drew their Kenshin weapons, looking at each other warily. These guys are not to be trifled with. Young Master Tianxing was right. Here comes another group of scoundrels trying to take advantage of the situation. Is this the case of the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind? It could also be the fisherman who benefits from the fight between the sandpiper and the clam. These guys are obviously stronger than Sacred Fire Sect. Which force could they be? Lin Shui, Bai Long and the rest were discussing secretly. At this moment, Ji Tianxing sized up the other party and said with a calm expression, "Previously, the Sacred Fire Sect came to kill me, and then you guys appeared. If I'm not wrong, you guys are also Prince Lian's lackeys from Surging Waves Palace, right?" The woman in blue was not angry at all. She was as cold and sharp as an icicle. She looked at Ji Tianxing indifferently and said, "That's right. Surging Waves Palace is here on Little Prince's orders to kill these traitors. Since you've guessed my identity, you're Tianxing, right?" "That's me." Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a playful smile and said, "Surging Waves Palace is indeed smarter than Sacred Fire Sect. You know that I'm invincible and unpredictable, so I let Sacred Fire Sect come to their deaths first, then you guys reap the benefit. It's a pity that you're late." The Lord of Surging Waves Palace was still expressionless as he said in a cold and deep voice, "It's not too late to kill you." "Ha ha ha, very confident." Ji Tianxing sneered as his sharp gaze swept past the Lord of Surging Waves Palace and the 7 elders. 1 8th Stage Realm Peak, 3 7th Stage Realm Peak, 2 7th Stage Realm and 2 6th Stage Realm Peak. Compared to the Sacred Fire Sect, it was indeed twice as strong. However, the 8 of you are far from enough. The 7 elders of Surging Wave Palace frowned. Their faces were filled with rage as they exuded killing intent. The palace master of the Surging Wave Palace remained unmoved. He said expressionlessly, "What if we add in the elites of the Surging Wave Palace? As her voice fell, 20 dazzling balls of 5-colored divine light lit up in the night sky in all directions. Within each ball of 5-colored divine light, there were more than 70 surging water palace disciples led by a deacon. More than 20 teams, which added up to more than 1,500 people, surrounded them at lightning speed. In just a short moment, an encirclement with a radius of 500 miles was formed. The surging wave palace disciples spread out and got into formation, forming a gigantic trapping formation. The inescapable net was quickly formed, and it seemed that Ji Tianxing and the others could not escape. The 7 elders of the surging wave palace all revealed a complacent cold smile. The palace master of the surging wave palace looked sharply at Ji Tianxing and asked, "Is it enough now?" Ji Tianxing shook his head and replied in a calm tone, "Still not enough. At most 1 hour, kill all of them." The 7 elders of the surging wave palace became even more infuriated. They could no longer suppress their anger as they started to reprimand him. "Lad, you're really too arrogant." "What an arrogant lad, you probably don't know how the word death is written right." "Lad, a battle before a battle is not drinking tea and chatting. You're just making a joke out of your mouth." "Little beast, you're about to die and you're still putting up a strong front? Do you think we'll fight a battle that we're not prepared for?" Seeing the 7 elders so indignant, Ji Tianxing gave a disdainful laugh. "Since you're so agitated, then this sovereign shall bestow upon you the most tragic way to die." The 7 elders were even more infuriated. All of them gritted their teeth and clenched their fists tightly as they were filled with murderous intent. However, since the Lord of Surging Wave did not give the order, they would not act rashly. The Lord of Surging Wave's gaze was like an icicle as he glared at Ji Tianxing and said in a deep voice, "Lad, you're very arrogant, but it's useless. The trap is set and you're dead for sure. Taking a step back, no matter how strong you are, I can still complete the mission as long as I surround you without killing you. You can say your last words now." Ji Tianxing chuckled. "Compared to Sacred Fire Sect's sect master, you're indeed smarter and calmer. However, you're only slightly stronger than him. Right now, you're treating me like a cicada and Sacred Fire Sect is the mantis while you're the oriole. However, who knows if you're not the oriole or the mantis?" The Lord of Surging Wave raised his brow and a cold glint flashed through his eyes as his lips curled into a mocking sneer. "Foo-foo, you're trying to get information out of me? I don't mind telling you the truth then. Sacred Fire Sect and Surging Wave Palace are only the vanguard. Outside the God Burial Mountain Range, there are even more butcher knives waiting to cut you into pieces. The little prince's methods and power are definitely not something you can imagine. Becoming mortal enemies with him is the stupidest decision of your life." Ever since the Lord of Surging Wave appeared, she had been expressionless and emotionless like ice. This was the first time her expression changed, and she actually revealed a cold smile. It was obvious that victory was already in her grasp, and she had a card up her sleeve. After hearing the Lord of Surging Wave's words, Ji Tianxing had an answer in his heart. The only factions that entered the God Burial Mountain Range with orders to kill him were Sacred Fire Sect and Surging Wave Palace. However, within the borders of the Raging Flame Divine Country, even the prince and many other factions had set up an inescapable net, waiting for him to crawl in. Of course, that was all for the future. At least for now, after dealing with Surging Wave Palace, there would be no more worries. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and revealed a smile to the Lord of Surging Wave. "Although it's futile, I still have to remind you out of benevolence. If you retreat with the Surging Wave Palace disciples now, you can still live and protect the foundation of Surging Wave Palace. If you persist in your wrong ways, it'll be too late for regret. An hour ago, I also gave the Sacred Fire Sect Master a chance. Unfortunately, he did not cherish it. You've also seen the outcome of Sacred Fire Sect." When they heard that, the 7 Surging Wave Palace elders were even more enraged and laughed out of anger. "Ha ha ha, what shameless boasting! Lad, stop acting. We've long seen through you. The more arrogant you act, the more it proves that you're anxious in your heart. You want to subdue us without a fight? Who do you think you are? Instead of spouting nonsense here, why don't you kneel down and beg for mercy? Perhaps you might even die a quick death." The Lord of Surging Wave narrowed her eyes and her gaze turned even colder. She said coldly, "It's indeed beyond my expectations that you could kill everyone from Sacred Fire Sect. However, after killing repeatedly, how much strength do you have left? I have orders. No matter how eloquent your words are, it's useless. Your life, this consort will definitely take it." With that, the Lord of Surging Wave ordered in a sonorous tone, "Kill." The 7 elders and more than 1,000 disciples acknowledged the order in unison and roared as they waved their weapons and launched an attack. Seeing that, Ji Tianxing sighed softly. "Sigh, this is the stupidest decision you've made in your life." Chapter 31:15. Ji Tianxing's sigh could no longer be heard by the people from Palace of Surging Waves. They were already filled with anger and could not hold back their surging murderous intent. At Palace Lord Surging Wave's command, the 7 elders and over 1,000 disciples all unleashed their most powerful ultimate killer moves. Heavenly Waves Saint Kill. Wild Waves 7 rolls. Violent Tide 20% cut. Xian Bing splitting 9 heavens. Everyone let out a low roar and released all kinds of Palace of Surging Waves unique skills. In an instant, huge waves that were 10,000 feet tall, raging tides that were 100 miles wide, and huge ice swords that covered the sky within a 300-mile radius. Over 1,000 disciples from Palace of Surging Waves joined forces and formed a battle formation. They released tens of thousands of sharp blades of divine light that rained down on Ji Tianxing and the others. The gloomy night sky was once again illuminated by the snow-white light. The sky and earth within a 500-mile radius were filled with endless waves and huge ice swords. The temperature dropped to the lowest level. The vast land and the surrounding mountains and rivers cracked due to the extreme cold. The earth and rocks were crushed. The air was frozen like ice and divine power could not circulate at all. In such an environment, Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui and Sir God Blood Illusion were not affected. However, Zhen Hong, left emissary Jin, Bai Long and the others felt extremely pressured. It was as though their bodies were frozen and the circulation of divine power slowed down. Luckily, Ji Tianxing was prepared and had a countermeasure. When Palace Master of Surging Waves gave the order to attack, he also raised his palms and held his sword fingers and deity seal to release his trump card. Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. He used a supreme secret skill to communicate with the stars outside the region and sent down endless power of stars. Instantly, 20,000 huge swords appeared in the sky and rained down like a meteor shower. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. In the blink of an eye, the 20,000 huge swords that were 10,000 feet long descended and sealed off the area within a 1,000-mile radius. A super sword formation was formed instantly. 20,000 huge divine swords shuttled back and forth and released a shapeless sword intention that suppressed the universe and a violent sword aura that could destroy everything. The gigantic swords that filled the sky shuttled back and forth, either blocking the gigantic waves, raging tides, and saber lights and sword shadows that blotted out the sun, or killing the battle formations of the surging water palace disciples. Bang! 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 And Kacha! Kacha! Loud noises kept ringing out, and the heaven and earth within a radius of several hundred kilometers was completely thrown into chaos. No matter how turbulent the waves were, they were all blocked by the net of sword light. No matter how sharp and cold the heavenly ice sword was, it was cut into pieces by the star sword. Tens of thousands of saber lights and sword shadows were unable to penetrate the barrier of the sword net, and they all collapsed and dissipated. After a few breaths of time, the first round of battle between the two sides ended. The result was beyond everyone's expectations. The elders and disciples of Surging Wave Palace were even more shocked as they revealed expressions of extreme shock. Ji Tianqing had single-handedly blocked the Surging Waves Palace's attack with just a super sword formation. The combined attack of 7 elders and over 1,000 disciples was actually neutralized by him alone. What kind of astonishing strength was this? What kind of terrifying methods were these? Everyone understood that even the Surging Wave Palace Lord did not possess such strength. Even the usually expressionless Surging Wave Palace Lord could not help but frown and narrow her eyes. A deep sense of shock and astonishment flashed through her eyes as she thought to herself, "This lad first fought a huge battle with Heavenly Sect and killed Long Fun and the experts of Heavenly Sect. Tonight, he fought a huge battle with Sacred Fire Sect and killed Xing Wuyin and the disciples of Sacred Fire Sect. Logically speaking, no matter how strong he should be severely injured and weak. But why is it that he doesn't show any signs of weakness or injury? Could it be that he hid too deeply and escaped my detection? Or is he truly not injured and his strength has always been at his peak?" The Surging Wave Palace Lord fell into silence as she hesitated and weighed her options. If it was the former, she was confident enough to rip apart Ji Tianqing's disguise and reveal his true form, causing him to die tragically on the spot. If it was the latter, she had severely misjudged Ji Tianqing's strength and condition. The consequences would be unimaginable. There was a high chance that Surging Wave Palace would follow in the footsteps of Sacred Fire Sect. The Surging Wave Palace Lord was extremely calm and cautious. She considered defeat before victory. After a short moment of consideration, she decided to continue attacking and test Ji Tianqing's strength. Kill! Her gaze regained its coldness and determination as she glared at Ji Tianqing in the night sky and hollered coldly. The 7 elders and more than 1,000 disciples tossed aside the shock and distracting thoughts in their hearts and attacked with all their might. Swoosh! 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 All sorts of divine powers and ultimate skills were used once more. Saber lights and sword shadows that blotted out the skies surged towards Ji Tianqing and the others like a flood. This time round, everyone released an even stronger combat strength with a stubborn and unyielding mentality. The divine powers that blotted out the skies were even more dazzling and powerful. However, the outcome was not different. Ji Tianqing had already perfected the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and injected 98 types of nomological powers into it. The 20,000 stellar swords turned into 5-colored divine swords with an even more mysterious and sharp aura. Swoosh! 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 The 10,000 gigantic swords danced and defended against the tsunami, slicing through the saber lights and sword shadows and shattering all sorts of divine powers and ultimate skills. The attacks of the Surging Wave Palace disciples were blocked and neutralized by the heaven-vanquishing sword formation once more. Seizing the opportunity, Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, White Dragon and the others released their trump cards and ultimate skills as well, charging towards the Surging Wave Palace disciples. Purge the world in blood. Lin Shui turned into a blood-colored phantom and charged in front of dozens of Surging Wave Palace disciples, slashing down with her blood saber with both hands. The blood saber shone with a resplendent light and brought forth a blood-colored saber shadow that blotted out the skies, drowning the Surging Wave Palace disciples. Swoosh! 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 After a series of flashes of blood, the night sky turned empty. More than 70 Surging Wave Palace disciples, including the low-level Divine Lord Deacon who led the team, were sliced into pieces by the blood saber and scattered into the night sky. Many godhoods flew out and fled in panic. Lin Shui's white hair fluttered as her blood saber danced and slashed out hundreds of dazzling beams of blood light. Crack! Crack! Shattering sounds rang out one after another as those godhoods were sliced into pieces. On the other side, Zhen Hong entered a berserk state and turned into a 10,000-foot-tall dragon blood goddess. Like a cannonball, he charged towards a group of Surging Wave Palace disciples. White Dragon was afraid that something would happen to her, so he also turned into a 10,000-foot-long lightning white dragon to assist her in her charge. He released lightning that blotted out the skies and swept up a shocking hurricane. The two of them joined forces and quickly killed the surging Wave Palace disciples. Similar scenes were playing out at the same time. Blood Illusion God, Gold Left Emissary, Blood Dragon Right Emissary, and the others also joined forces to kill a group of surging Wave Palace disciples. Ji Tianxing, Qian Yu and Black Dragon also instantly killed more than 70 disciples in a berserk and invincible manner. 2 breaths later, the second round of confrontation ended. Ji Tianxing and the others were unscathed while the surging Wave Palace paid the price in blood. A total of 4 battle formations and 300 surging Wave Palace disciples were instantly killed by Ji Tianxing and the others. A gap instantly appeared in the surging Wave Palace's encirclement. Everyone's spirit and will also suffered a setback and blow. The fastest mobile version of the website. Chapter 31:16. Surging Wave Palace's morale was affected after receiving such a blow. The fighting spirit of the 7 elders and disciples dropped noticeably. Their full-powered attacks were blocked and neutralized by the heaven-vanquishing sword formation. As for the attacks of Ji Tianxing and the others, the disciples of Surging Wave Palace were unable to defend against them and were killed with ease. Wasn't that the omen of defeat? At the thought of that, the disciples of Surging Wave Palace were filled with worry and anxiety. Helpless, they turned to the 7 elders and the Lord of Surging Wave Palace, hoping that they could come up with an effective countermeasure. The 7 elders felt uneasy as well. They were both furious and worried as they looked at the Lord of Surging Wave Palace. The Lord of Surging Wave Palace was still calm and composed as she sat on the ice lotus platform. She ordered expressionlessly, "Disciples of Surging Wave Palace, form the Surging Wave 9 Revolutions Divine Formation and fight the enemy together." At the same time as she gave that order, she flew high into the skies. Swoosh! The ice-blue lotus platform hovered high in the skies and released 18 ice-blue light pillars that flew in all directions like divine dragons. The Lord of Surging Wave Palace sat on the lotus platform and conjured a divine art with both hands that moved at lightning speed, forming a mysterious divine seal. It was clear that she had taken action personally. With herself as the core, she gathered the strength of more than 1,000 Surging Wave Palace disciples to form the Surging Wave 9 Revolutions Divine Formation to defend against the attacks of the Heaven-Vanquishing Sword Formation and Ji Tianxing. The Surging Wave 9 Revolutions Divine Formation was the Sect Protection Formation of Surging Wave Palace, and it was also an Ancestral Monarch Grade God Formation. The offensive and destructive power of that formation was only at the superior grade Monarch grade. However, its defensive power was at the level of a superior grade Monarch grade. Through 2 clashes, the Lord of Surging Wave Palace had already found out the answer. She had to admit that Ji Tianxing was not faking it or putting on a strong front. He was truly uninjured and his strength was at his peak state such that no one could see through him clearly. If the disciples of Surging Wave Palace continued to attack, they would definitely be at a disadvantage. With each clash, hundreds of disciples would die in battle. Before long, Surging Wave Palace would be defeated. Therefore, the Lord of Surging Wave Palace made a prompt decision to change her strategy. She no longer allowed the disciples to attack proactively and formed a defensive formation instead. As long as she used the Surging Wave's 9-turn Divine Formation to block the attacks of the Heaven-Destroying Sword Formation and Ji Tianxing and the others, she would be able to stall for time. She had already sent out a communication jade slip to report the situation to Grand Prince Lian. Prince Lian had already set up many forces outside the God-burying mountain range, forming an inescapable net. As long as she could stall Ji Tianxing, the experts from the other forces would quickly arrive. At that time, they would gather the strength of many forces and experts to jointly encircle Ji Tianxing. No matter how capable Ji Tianxing was, he would still be buried here. Swish! Swish! Very quickly, the 7 elders and over 1,000 surging water palace disciples changed positions. The surging wave palace disciples formed 17 square formations, while the 7 elders formed 1 square formation. There were a total of 18 square formations, and they were just enough to support the 18 icy blue light pillars released by the Lotus Throne. Suddenly, the foundation of the 9 rotations of blue waves was formed. With the Lord of Surging Waves at the center, he sat on a lotus platform high in the sky. 18 light pillars extended from the Lotus Throne, connecting the 18 square formations and gathering the strength of over 1,000 disciples and 7 elders. The night sky was immediately covered by a layer of icy blue divine light that covered a radius of 250 kilometers. Swish, swish, swish. The icy blue divine light continued to condense and thicken, and its defensive power also increased explosively. In just 2 breaths, a barrier of icy blue divine light that covered a radius of 250 kilometers was successfully formed. The heaven-destroying sword formation sped up, and the 10,000 giant swords stabbed even more violently, but they were all blocked by the icy blue light barrier. The giant divine swords stabbed into the icy blue light barrier, producing crisp clanging sounds as countless fragments of divine light burst forth. However, the icy blue light barrier was unbreakable. Even though it was constantly trembling from the giant divine swords, it did not break. Instead, the giant swords were sent flying. After 3 breaths of time, the giant divine swords still could not break through the icy blue light barrier. When the Surging Wave Palace disciples saw this, they were instantly relieved and regained their confidence and calmness. Some of the elders even sneered mockingly as they mocked Ji Tianxing. "Lad, what other tricks do you have? Use them all." This Surging Waves 9 Revolutions divine formation is the ultimate technique of Surging Waves Palace. Its defense is unparalleled in the world. Everyone in Surging Waves Palace is of one mind. This divine formation gathers all of our strength. With just you alone, no matter how capable you are, you won't be able to do anything to us. Ha ha. Little B** starred, weren't you very arrogant earlier on? We're right here. Come and kill us if you can. The Surging Waves 9 Revolutions divine formation was their greatest reliance. Under the protection of the icy blue light barrier, everyone was safe and at ease. When they heard what the elders said, many deacons and Surging Waves Palace disciples mocked and scolded Ji Tianxing and the others. Ji Tianxing was expressionless and turned a deaf ear to everyone's words. His eyes turned golden as he stared at the Surging Waves 9 Revolutions divine formation expressionlessly, looking for a flaw and a way to break it. On the other hand, Lin Shui, Bai Long, Zhen Hong and the others were furious and filled with killing intent. When they saw the despicable faces of the Surging Waves Palace elders, they all waved their weapons and executed their ultimate killing moves to attack the icy blue light barrier with all their might. However, the sky was filled with blood light, saber light and divine ability shadows. They all bombarded the icy blue light barrier but were completely ineffective. The icy blue light barrier was indestructible and did not leave any marks or cracks after taking a few attacks from everyone. This scene made the elders and disciples of Surging Waves Palace even more confident and arrogant. They laughed loudly and mocked and scolded Lin Shui and the others without restraint. Ha ha! You bunch of stupid pigs are truly comical and laughable. I've already said that the Surging Waves 9 Revolutions divine formation's defense is unparalleled in the world. You guys are like ants trying to shake a tree. Even Tianxing can't do anything to us, what more you scum? Don't overestimate yourself. Bastards, stop resisting stubbornly. Kneel down and surrender obediently, kowtow and beg for mercy. Kill all the men and grind their bones to dust. Leave all the women and let everyone The elders of Surging Waves Palace cared about their statuses. Although they spoke rudely, they would not be too despicable. However, the deacons and disciples were unbearably vulgar and used all sorts of profanities. Even the Lord of Surging Waves who sat on the lotus platform high in the sky could not help but frown with a displeased expression. However, she was the leader of Surging Waves Palace after all. At this juncture, even if the disciples were unrestrained, she could not stop them. She could only focus and control the god formation with all her might to defend against the suppression and strangulation of the heaven-vanquishing sword formation. Both parties were in a stalemate just like that. A full 100 breaths had passed. Lin Shui, the White Dragon and the others could not do anything to the disciples of Surging Waves Palace. Ji Tianqing remained silent the entire time and stared at the icy blue light barrier with his golden eyes, searching for a flaw in the god formation amidst the billions of divine power meridians. Finally, he raised his brow and opened his eyes slightly, his lips curling into a sinister sneer. "I see." The next moment, he gripped the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and attacked brazenly. Chapter 31:17. The elders and disciples of Surging Wave Palace were still immersed in their confidence. They maintained the Surging Wave 9 rotations array while mocking and insulting Ji Tianqing and the others. Under the ice sky barrier, they felt that they were safe and invincible. That was why they were so fearless. However, no one expected that Ji Tianqing would attack when they were at their most arrogant. His attack this time was not an ordinary test. It was a killing blow. Ji Tianqing's figure flashed and he teleported into the night sky. He appeared in the southeast of the lotus platform, 100 miles away from the Lord of Surging Wave Palace and 1,000 feet below the lotus platform. This was the place. Beneath his feet was the indestructible ice sky barrier. The ice-blue light wall that looked very thick and flashing with cold light actually hid an extremely tiny flaw. There was nothing absolutely perfect in this world. Be it divine weapons, array formations or elixirs, they were all the same. Even though the Surging Wave 9 rotations array was a supreme-grade monarch array formed by 120 million meridians. However, there were still 2 or 3 flaws and errors among the 120 million veins of the formation. These flaws and mistakes were the flaws of the entire array. Of course, even the expert who created this array might not know the existence of the flaws and mistakes, let alone pinpoint the exact location. However, Ji Tianqing did it. Moreover, he found the flaw and found it in just 100 breaths' time. Such ability and methods were comparable to a supreme divine king. Sword-breaking 9 heavens. After confirming the location of the flaw, Ji Tianqing held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and stabbed it with all his might. The sword of burial of heaven released an endless amount of blazing white divine light and stabbed the ice sky barrier in the most violent and invincible manner. Boom! Crack! A thunderous sound exploded in the night sky. The seemingly indestructible ice sky barrier was actually pierced through by the blazing white sword light that was thousands of feet long. A hole the size of a house appeared on the ice sky barrier. Immediately after, sword energy and divine power that could destroy everything were injected into the ice sky barrier. Crack! Crack! With a crisp cracking sound, dense cracks appeared around the hole, extending in all directions. Hundreds of cracks spread across the ice-blue barrier like a spider web. From the gaps and loopholes, billions of icy blue fragments burst out and scattered in the night sky. It was like a rainstorm of ice crystals. The Surging Waves 9 Revolutions divine formation that the Surging Waves Palace was most proud of was destroyed by Ji Tianqing just like that. At this moment, the ice-blue barrier within a radius of 500 miles began to tremble violently. More than 1,000 Surging Waves Palace disciples and 7 elders were all dumbstruck, as though they had been petrified. All the mocking and insulting voices came to an abrupt end, stuck in the throats of the crowd, unable to make the slightest sound. Everyone's body and expression stiffened. His eyes were wide open, revealing a look of extreme shock and fear. The person who was the most shocked and appalled was none other than the Lord of Surging Wave Palace. Originally, she was sitting on the lotus throne, her expression cold and her emotions unperturbed. At this moment, she widened her eyes in shock and stood up abruptly. She no longer had the bearing and demeanor of a palace lord or an expert. How is this possible? She glared at Ji Tianxing and the hole in the ice-blue barrier and exclaimed. An incomparable shock filled her heart and soul, causing her to tremble from head to toe. As the saying went, the layman watched the show while the expert watched the artistry. All the Surging Waves Palace disciples saw was Ji Tianxing's domineering and unparalleled strength as he pierced through the ice-blue barrier with a single sword strike. However, the Lord of Surging Wave Palace saw it clearly. Ji Tianxing's sword strike was definitely not a random attack. He had seen through the Surging Wave's 9 revolutions divine formation and found the flaw of the God formation, destroying it with a single sword strike. The God formation that our sect is most proud of has a flaw and a flaw? Why is he able to find the flaw of the God formation in a short 100 breaths when I don't know about it? This is ridiculous. After understanding the mystery, the Lord of Surging Wave Palace felt the world spin and she saw stars. In fact, she even felt a little dazed and unreal. After all, everything was way too ridiculous. An outsider, an enemy, knew the Surging Wave's 9 revolutions divine formation better than her? What a joke! Fu, pft. The Lord of Surging Wave Palace sneered dejectedly. Suddenly, her throat heated up and she spat out a mouthful of blood. She was cold on the outside but proud on the inside. Yet, she could not take such a blow and spat out blood. Of course, the main reason why she spat out blood was because Ji Tianxing had broken through the Surging Wave's 9 revolutions divine formation. As the core of the God formation, she was definitely implicated and suffered a backlash. Her organs were already severely injured. Crack, crack. While everyone was still in a daze, Ji Tianxing swung the barrier of heaven again and slashed dozens of times at the ice-blue barrier. Every single strike was at a tricky spot, landing on the gaps and cracks. The outcome was obvious. With a crisp cracking sound, the ice-blue barrier was split into pieces and collapsed on the spot. Splash! Thousands of ice-blue fragments fell from the night sky with a loud rumble. Every single shard had a different shape and size. The large ones were the size of mountains while the small ones were the size of houses. All of them crashed onto the ground. In less than 2 breaths, the ice-blue barrier within a radius of 250 kilometers was reduced to smithereens and was completely destroyed. It was only at this moment that everyone from Surging Wave Palace snapped out of their daze and burst into deafening cries and curses. Of course, there were also sorrowful wails and painful screams. The battlefield was in chaos. The Surging Wave Palace disciples' fighting spirit plummeted and their spirits and wills crumbled one after another. Seizing the opportunity, Lin Shui, White Dragon and the others cheered excitedly and charged into the crowd with menacing smiles. All sorts of mystic skills and saber lights and sword shadows rained down like torrential floodwaters. The heaven-vanquishing sword formation sped up as well, releasing a dense rain of gigantic divine swords to kill the Surging Wave Palace disciples. Instantly, the night sky was filled with blood-curdling screams and muffled sounds. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere as severed limbs and blood rained down from the night sky. Without their protection, the Surging Wave Palace disciples were like weak lambs that were slaughtered wantonly. The more arrogant and smug they were previously, the more wretched and tragic they were now. Defeated. To think that I would have been defeated. Utterly defeated. Fufofu, to think that the Surging Wave Palace that has a legacy of 10,000 years would be defeated in the hands of a foreign race lad. I've underestimated him after all. The Lord of Surging Wave stood on the lotus platform with a dispirited expression and murmured dejectedly. Her face was filled with a bitter smile and her expression was sorrowful and desolate. At this point, the defeat of Surging Wave Palace was already a foregone conclusion. However, she calmed down quickly and pulled herself together, returning to her cold self. Although Surging Wave Palace was about to be defeated, she refused to give up. Even if the heaven-vanquishing sword formation sealed this place, she wanted to do her best to lead her disciples out of the encirclement. How many of them could escape and how many of them could survive would all depend on the will of the heavens. The fastest mobile version of the website. Chapter 31:18. Calm down. Disciples of Surging Wave Palace, brace yourselves. The Lord of Surging Wave endured her injuries and stood upright on the lotus platform, shouting with all her might. Her voice was powerful, cold, and dignified, containing a power that could shock one's spirit. Initially, the disciples of Surging Wave's palace panicked and were killed to the point that they threw away their armor and were utterly defeated. However, many of them calmed down when they heard the Lord of Surging Waves shout. With 7 elders leading the way, 18 wardens and 800-odd disciples tried their best to gather around the Lord of Surging Wave. Everyone knew that they could no longer be separated now that the Surging Wave 9 Revolutions formation was destroyed. They had to gather around the Lord of Surging Wave to have a chance to counterattack or escape. If it was any other day, they would only need 2 to 3 breaths to gather. However, the process was extremely difficult and took a long time now. As they gathered around the Lord of Surging Wave, they were constantly attacked by Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and the others. Every few feet they advanced, someone would die. 100 breaths later, everyone finally gathered around the Lord of Surging Wave. At this time, there were only 7 elders, 12 deacons, and more than 400 disciples who had survived. Apart from them, all the other disciples of Surging Wave Palace had died in battle. More than half of them were killed by Ji Tianxing and the others, while the rest were killed by the heaven-vanquishing sword formation. It was fortunate that the Lord of Surging Wave had stepped in and defended against the attacks of Ji Tianxing and the others with all his might, neutralizing the attacks of the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and saving the lives of the 400-odd disciples. If not for her desperate rescue, the 400-odd disciples might not have been able to gather. Heavenly Ice Spike Formation. Break through with all your might. After everyone gathered, the Lord of Surging Wave gave the order immediately. More than 400 elders, deacons, and disciples immediately arranged themselves into a formation that resembled a sharp cone made of ice crystals. This was the assault formation that Surging Wave Palace often used. It could effectively gather everyone's strength and break through the defense line and encirclement quickly. The Lord of Surging Wave stood in the middle of the formation, overseeing the entire situation. The 7 elders were at the tip of the formation, turning into the sharpest blades that cut through all obstacles. The 12 wardens were at the back of the formation, covering the back of the 400-odd disciples. At this moment, the disciples of Surging Wave's Palace displayed a strong sense of unity. It could be said that they were united and their morale was high. Swish, swish. Thousands of giant divine swords rained down like a torrential downpour. The 7 elders rushed forward and blocked the attack without any regard for their own safety. Lord Surging Wave also executed his ultimate divine powers with all his might, repelling the gigantic swords. More than 400 disciples also worked together to resist the sword formation's attack. However, everyone managed to block the attack of the heaven-destroying sword formation, but they could not block the encirclement of Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and the others. Starry River Break. Demon Blood Sealing Devil Saber. Stars of Destruction. Soaring Tyrant Dragon Slash. Along with the furious roars, the 5-colored light blade and fist radiance that could split the sky and the earth smashed into the crowd with the power to destroy everything. Pung pung pung. Rumble. Deafening muffled sounds rang out continuously in the night sky, shaking the heavens and the earth. The Surging Wave Palace's all-formation was instantly shrouded in chaotic divine light, turning into a mess. Several gaps were created in the formation, and dozens of disciples and 3 deacons were killed on the spot. Blood rained down, flesh and blood splattered everywhere, and screams of agony and shock sounded one after another. Such a scene made Lord Surging Wave and the elders so furious that their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets, and their bodies were burning with bloody flames. If they could, they really wanted to fight to the death and perish together with Ji Tianqing. However, the big picture was more important, and they could only suppress this thought and risk their lives to protect the disciples. The bitter battle was still going on, but time passed extremely slowly. The Surging Wave Palace disciples flew south with difficulty, getting closer and closer to the edge of the heaven-destroying sword formation. 100 miles, 90 miles, 80 miles, 70 miles, however, as they struggled to advance, their numbers decreased at an extremely fast rate. More than 430 people, more than 440 people, more than 380 people, more than 330 people. 15 minutes later, the Surging Wave Palace disciples were only about 40 miles away from the edge of the sword formation. At this moment, the all formation had already collapsed and could no longer be formed. 80% of the initial 400-odd disciples were killed as well. The remaining 80-odd were also covered in blood and severely injured. All of them were in a wretched state. It was difficult for them to advance any further, and they gradually slowed down until they came to a stop. The Lord Surging Wave, who was covered in blood and had disheveled hair, turned back to look. The ruins spanning dozens of miles were filled with the corpses of the Surging Wave Palace disciples, and dark red and purple bloodstains could be seen everywhere. Looking at the remnants of the defeated army beside him, it was even more tragic and tragic. A deep sense of sorrow surged into his heart as tears of blood gushed from his eyes, and he lamented internally, "The heavens are going to destroy Surging Wave Palace." At that moment, she could already see the outcome of Surging Wave Palace's failure to break out. It was as Ji Tianqing had said before the battle, Surging Wave Palace would be destroyed on the spot, following in the footsteps of Sacred Fire Sect. Since struggling was futile, she might as well give up on breaking out and fight to the death without a care. Although the outcome would not change, she would still have to die here. At the very least, she could release the torrential rage and killing intent in her heart. Kill that bastard Tianqing at all costs. The Lord Surging Wave stood on the lotus platform, roaring at the top of his lungs with a face covered in blood and tears. The 5 elders, 8 attendants, and 70-odd elite disciples that were lucky enough to survive had long lost their wills and were in complete despair. They knew that there was no hope of breaking out of the encirclement. If they could retaliate and drag Ji Tianqing down with them, their deaths would be worth it. Upon hearing the Lord Surging Wave's orders, they charged towards Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety and launched their most ferocious attacks. At that moment they were like frenzied, bloodthirsty, ferocious beasts. They did not care about their own injuries or the deaths of their companions, and only had Ji Tianqing in their eyes. They had lost the ability to think, and were left with only a single thought. That was to perish together with Ji Tianqing. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hundreds of divine powers and secret skills gave off dazzling divine light, exploding with destructive power and raining down on Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing made a prompt decision and used his ultimate skill, infinite turbidity, with all his might. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, his body turned transparent and blended into the universe. The universe within a radius of tens of thousands of miles became his protective shield, helping him to withstand all the attacks. The saber radiance, sword shadows, and divine light that blotted out the sky passed through him without any delay, scattering in the universe and disappearing very quickly. Ji Tianqing was unharmed, and the people from Surging Wave Palace were destined to be futile. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Lin Shui, Sir God Blood Illusion, and the rest attacked the disciples of Surging Wave Palace with all their might. The heaven-destroying sword formation also unleashed its full power, sweeping up dozens of sword hurricanes that wreaked havoc on the battlefield. Rumble!